The glow from the phone screen was the only real light in the room, painting my face a dead bluish white. The day had been shit. My boss, a man whose face looked permanently stuck in a state of sniffing something bad, had spent 8 hours making my life a special kind of hell. Now, on my couch, surrounded by the cardboard ghosts of last night's pizza, I was getting my revenge one mindless scroll at a time. The city hummed its low, endless song outside my 7th-floor window. I mumbled another curse at my boss's imagined face and shifted my weight on the lumpy cushion. Click. It was a small sound. Barely there. Dry and sharp. From the direction of the front door. I stopped my thumb mid-scroll. My apartment building was old, a brick box full of weird groans and settling noises. The heavy fire door in the main stairwell probably just slammed shut from a draft. Yeah, that was it. Just a building breathing. I dismissed it. My phone was more interesting. The world inside the little glowing rectangle was loud and stupid and, right now, a welcome escape. About 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15. The glowing screen started to hurt my eyes, and a thirst was building in my throat. I swung my legs off the sofa, the old springs groaning in protest. The floorboards were cool under my bare feet as I walked toward the kitchen. I passed the front door without a thought, my mind already on the cold can of soda waiting for me in the fridge. Then I saw it. I stopped. My hand, reaching for the kitchen doorway, froze in midair. There, on the dark gray welcome mat, the one on the inside of my apartment, was a single, dried leaf. It was brown and curled at the edges, brittle. My brain stalled. The windows were all closed. The AC unit was off. There was no draft. And I knew, with the kind of certainty that you only have about your own boring routines, that I had swept the entryway yesterday morning. It was clean. The thought process shifted gears. It went from, it's probably nothing, to wait a second. From where? How? I felt a flash of annoyance. It was just a stupid leaf, but it made no sense. It was a detail that didn't fit. I walked over to the door, my bare feet silent on the wood. The leaf was just lying there, an intruder. I bent down but didn't touch it. I just stared at it. It was real. With a grunt of frustration, I reached for the handle, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. The hallway outside was empty. The dim yellow light from the overhead fixtures cast long shadows from nothing. No wind, no person, just the faint smell of old carpeting and disinfectant. I looked down. The hallway floor was clear. No other leaves. It was just in my apartment. I shook my head, closed the door, and shot the deadbolt home with a loud, satisfying thunk. I turned the extra security lock just below it, a habit from living in the city. Fine, whatever. A mystery leaf. My soda was waiting. My phone rang. The sound shattered the quiet. It was a loud, jarring ringtone I'd never heard before. I fumbled it out of my pocket. The screen read, unknown number. Probably a spam call. I almost ignored it, but the timing right now felt weird. I hit the green icon. Hello, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Silence. Just the faint, hissing sound of an open line. I could feel my patience fraying. First the leaf, now this. Who is this? I snapped. A sound came from the other end. Not a voice, at first. More like a breath. A long, slow exhale, filtered through something electronic. Then, a whisper. The words were low, distorted, like they were being spoken through a fan and a vocoder at the same time. You shouldn't have opened the door. My blood went cold. Not a slow chill. It was instant, like being dunked in ice water. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. He knew. He knew I just opened the door. He wasn't just on the phone. He was close, close enough to see. My eyes darted around the living room, to the windows. The blinds were drawn. My gaze snapped back to the front door, to the peephole. He was out there. He had to be. The line went dead. My hand was shaking. I dropped the phone onto the floor. It clattered loudly on the hardwood. I didn't care. My body moved on its own. I lunged a second time for the door. my fingers checking the deadbolt, checking the security lock. They were both secure. Solid. But they didn't feel like enough. Not anymore. A piece of metal wasn't going to stop someone who could see through walls. How did he see me? A camera in the hallway? Did the landlord install new ones? No, they wouldn't. Not without telling us. My mind was a frantic storm of questions with no answers. I backed away from the door, my eyes locked on it as if it were a wild animal. Panic was a hot wire in my chest. I had to turn the lights off. Now. I scrambled across the room, my palms sweating, and slapped the light switch by the kitchen. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the faint ambient glow of the city outside, filtering through the blinds. Where do I hide? The question was primal. The couch. It was big, it was in the center of the room, and it was the only real cover I had. I dropped to my knees, my kneecaps banging hard against the floor, and crawled behind it. I pressed my back against the cheap fabric, my head turned so I could just peer around the edge. My entire world was now the front door and the small patch of floor in front of it. I held my breath. The silence that followed was worse than the phone call. It was a heavy, loaded silence, a waiting silence. I could hear everything. The hum of the fridge, the far-off wail of a siren, the hammering of my own heart in my ears. It was so loud, I was sure he could hear it too, right through the door. Come on, do something. Break it down, yell. Anything. But there was nothing. Just the silence, stretching and stretching until my lungs burned. I was a mouse in a trap, waiting for the snap. And then it happened. Slowly. So slowly I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. The doorknob began to turn. It moved with a smooth, deliberate motion. No rattling, no forcing it. Just a slow, steady turn downward. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My eyes were wide, fixed on that small piece of brass. It reached the bottom of its rotation, fully turned. The latch inside the door was pulled back. The only thing holding it shut was the deadbolt. A long second passed. 2. Then, just as slowly, the knob turned back to its original position. A soft, final click as it settled. He wasn't trying to get in. He was showing me he could. He was toying with me. A cat batting at a cornered mouse. The sheer arrogance of it sent a new wave of fear through me, colder and deeper than the first. This wasn't random. This was a game. His game. Minutes crawled by. Each one an hour long. I stayed behind the couch, cramped and shaking, my eyes glued to the door. Nothing. Not a sound. The hallway was silent. The doorknob was still. Did he leave? Was the game over for tonight? 2. I had to know. I couldn't stay crouched behind this sofa all night. Slowly, I pushed myself up. My muscles screamed in protest. I moved in a low crouch, one slow step at a time, toward the door. The floorboards didn't make a sound. When I reached it, I pressed my ear against the cold wood. Nothing. My heart was still a frantic drum solo. Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like my first one in an eternity, I leaned forward and put my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens showed me the hallway. The same dim yellow light, the same empty stretch of worn carpet. He was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. I let out the breath I was holding in a shaky gasp. He was gone. A twisted prankster, a sick bastard, but he was gone. I stumbled back from the door, my body trembling with the adrenaline crash. My hand went to my face, wiping away sweat I didn't even realize was there. Just as I turned my back to the door, my phone, still lying on the floor, lit up. Ting! The sound of a single text message notification. I stared at it, at the little screen glowing in the dark. It was from the same unknown number. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to look. I had to. I bent down, my fingers trembling, and picked it up. I tapped the notification. It was a picture. The image loaded instantly. It was a photo of me. The back of my head, my shoulders hunched. My eye pressed against the peephole of my own front door. The picture had been taken just a second ago. It was taken from inside the room. From somewhere high up, near the ceiling. I didn't sleep. Sleep wasn't an option. The night was a long, dark hallway of me staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the building a footstep. Every distant siren a scream meant for me. The phone lay on the floor where I dropped it, its screen dark. The picture was burned into my brain, the back of my head, the wood grain of my own door, the faint fisheye curve of the peephole. A picture taken from inside the room. From above. How? The question hammered at my skull for hours. I scanned the corners of the ceiling, the top of the bookshelf, the smoke detector. Nothing. No camera. No little red light. Nothing but smooth, white plaster. But the picture was real. I had seen it. He was in here. Or he had been. Or a camera was. The sun started to bleed through the blinds, turning the dark gray of the room into a washed-out, sick-looking blue. Morning didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like an interrogation light snapping on. The city outside woke up with its usual symphony of garbage trucks and car horns. It sounded 1,000,000 miles away. Exhaustion was a physical weight. My bones ached. My eyes felt like they were full of sand. I had to move. I had to do something normal. I crawled off the couch, my joints popping. Coffee. I needed coffee. A normal person makes coffee in the morning. The kitchen floor was cold on my bare feet. I filled the machine, my hands shaking so much I spilled grounds on the counter. While it gurgled and hissed, I leaned against the counter, my head in my hands. It was a prank. It had to be. A sick, elaborate prank. Some tech-savvy kid in the building, hacking my Wi-Fi, maybe flew a micro-drone into my apartment when I had the window open last week. Planted a camera. Yeah, that made sense. It was insane, but it made more sense than a ghost. It was a person. A person I could find. A person I could hurt. The anger felt better than the fear. It was something solid. I was pouring the black liquid into a mug when it happened. Knock. 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 The sound shot through me like a bullet. The mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Hot coffee splashed across my feet, but I barely felt the burn. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The knocking came from the front door. My breathing stopped. He was back. In the middle of the day. The sheer nerve of it. My eyes darted around the kitchen. The biggest knife was in the block on the counter. I just needed to reach it. Knock, 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 knock. A different sound this time. Softer. Less patient. It was followed by a woman's voice, thin and reedy. "Hello? Young man? Are you in there?" I knew that voice. It was Mrs. Gable. From 7B. The old woman with the little yapping dog who was always collecting for some charity or another. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed. A new fear bloomed. What if he was using her? What if he had a knife to her back? My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I crept out of the kitchen, staying low, my eyes locked on the front door. I avoided the broken ceramic and the puddle of coffee. Each step was an eternity. When I reached the door, I didn't make a sound. I took a slow, deep breath and put my eye to the peephole. The distorted lens showed me Mrs. Gable, just as I'd pictured. She was alone. White-haired, her face a road map of wrinkles, she clutched her worn cardigan closed at her chest. She looked harmless. Anxious, even. Relief washed over me, so strong I felt dizzy. It was just my neighbor. Just getting a cup of sugar, I muttered to myself, the words tasting like ash. My hand shook as I undid the locks. The deadbolt made a loud, obscene thunk as I turned it. I pulled the door open a few inches, leaving the chain on. "Mrs. Gable?" She blinked, startled by the noise. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the floor by my feet. "Oh, dear. Did you have an accident?" I glanced down. I tracked coffee from the kitchen. Yeah, spilled my coffee." Goodness, she said, but her eyes didn't seem to care about the spill. They rose to meet mine. They were cloudy, a pale, watery blue. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Her expression was blank. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't anything. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice tight. The relief was gone again. Something was wrong. She didn't answer right away. She just kept looking at me, a faint, tiny smile playing on her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. Then she raised a frail, bony hand. Clutched in her fingers was a small, silver object. It was my Zippo lighter, my dad's old Zippo. The one I kept on my desk, next to my monitor. "I think you dropped this," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "Found it in the hallway last night, right outside your door." My brain stalled. My thoughts crashed. I stared at the lighter. It was impossible. It was on my desk. I hadn't left the apartment in 2 days. I knew it was on my desk. "I saw it yesterday." I didn't go outside," I managed to say. My throat felt tight. Mrs. Gable's weird little smile widened. She pushed the lighter through the gap in the door, pressing it into my palm. It was cold. Colder than it should have been. Like it had been lying on concrete in the middle of winter. "You should be more careful, dear," she said, her voice dropping lower. She leaned in closer to the crack in the door. I could smell mothballs and something else, something sour. "The walls here are very thin." She pulled back, her smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Without another word, she turned and shuffled down the hallway toward her apartment. I closed the door. I slid the deadbolt. I attached the chain. I turned the extra security lock. Click. Thunk. Clank. My back was pressed against the wood. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. The Zippo was heavy in my hand. How? How did it get outside? He was in here. He took it. He went outside and dropped it for her to find. It was a message. Another piece of the game. My head was spinning. I stumbled toward the living room, my gaze sweeping the apartment. It looked the same. The couch. The TV. The desk where the lighter was supposed to be. My Hive smart speaker sat on the end table, its little ring of lights dark. And then it lit up. A circle of blue light. A sound crackled from it. Not music. Not a weather report. Just static. A harsh, electric shh. My eyes were glued to it. The static grew louder, then cut out. A voice came from the small speaker. It was a digital monotone, a text-to-speech voice. Cold. Computerized. Sexless. "She's lying." I stopped breathing. The Zippo fell from my hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The robotic voice spoke again, each word perfectly spaced, perfectly devoid of emotion. I gave it back to you. The world dissolved into pure, white-hot panic. It wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't a prank. It was in my speaker. It was in my home. He was connected to everything. A ghost in my machine. WHO. "Are you?" I screamed, my voice raw. I didn't even recognize the sound. It was an animal noise. I lunged forward. I grabbed the Hive speaker, ripping the cord from the wall. I drew my arm back and threw it with everything I had. It smashed against the far wall with a satisfying crunch of plastic and electronics, falling to the floor in a sad little heap of broken parts. "Get out!" I bellowed at the empty air. "Get the fuck out of my house." Silence. The only answer was the echo of my own voice. But I couldn't stop. The rage and fear were a feedback loop. I had to do something. The old woman. She was a part of it. She had to be. I wheeled around and wrenched my front door open, not bothering with the locks. I stormed out into the hallway, leaving my door wide open. I pounded on 7B, my fists hammered against the wood. "Mrs. Gable, open this door! What did you do? WHO, are you working with?" Nothing. I slammed my ear against the door. I couldn't hear a thing. No dog yapping, no TV, no shuffling footsteps. It was like the apartment was a tomb. "I know you're in there!" I roared, kicking the bottom of the door. The wood shuddered but held. Still nothing. Defeated, my rage collapsing back into a cold, shaking dread, I stumbled back. The hallway was empty. My own apartment door hung open, a dark, gaping mouth. My sanctuary was violated. It wasn't safe anymore. Nowhere was safe. Slowly, I walked back. My shoulders slumped. My breathing came in ragged gasps. What now? Call the cops? Tell them what? That my neighbor gave me my lighter and my smart speaker said something weird? They'd think I was crazy. They'd lock me up. I stepped back across my own threshold. I closed the door behind me, my hand trembling too much to work the locks. I leaned against it, my head falling back against the wood. I just wanted it to stop. My eyes drifted across the room. To my desk. My computer monitor was on. I hadn't turned it on. It glowed with a soft white light in the dim room. A standard notepad file was open, filling the screen. The cursor was a single, black line, blinking at the end of a sentence. I couldn't breathe. My feet moved on their own, carrying me closer. One step, then another. My eyes strained to read the text. It was one line, just one line, typed in the default font. All caps. You're shouting too loud. The blinking cursor was a single, black heartbeat on the screen. You're shouting too loud. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. A correction. Like a parent shushing a child. My own scream was still stuck in my throat. No, I wasn't the child here. This was my apartment, my computer, my life. A cold rage, clear and sharp, cut through the panic. I was not going to be a puppet. I wasn't going to be a rat in a maze for some sick bastard's entertainment. I had to fight back. I had to blind him. My eyes scanned the room, the laptop on the desk, the big smart TV on the wall. Each one had a tiny, black, circular eye, a webcam, his eyes. I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in days. I went to my desk drawer and pulled out a roll of black electrical tape. The plastic made a sharp zipping sound as I tore off the first piece. It felt good, a sound I was in control of. I walked to the laptop and pressed the tape firmly over the tiny lens above the screen. A black, final patch, one eye down. I went to the TV next. It was a bigger lens, a more prominent eye built into the top bezel. I tore off a longer piece of tape and slapped it on. It covered the camera and the small microphone holes beside it. 2 eyes down. I felt a small, bitter surge of victory, a tiny reclamation of my own space. I was building a wall. He could have the network, but he couldn't have my image. He couldn't watch me anymore. Breathing hard, I went back to the desk. I needed to act normal. To show him he wasn't getting to me. I had work to do, spreadsheets to fill, a project I was already behind on. A normal person does his job. I sat down, my jaw tight. I stared at the message still on the screen. With a shaking finger, I clicked the red X. The notepad file vanished. My desktop reappeared. A grid of familiar icons. My files, my games, my world. I reached for the mouse. As my fingers brushed against the cool plastic, the cursor on the screen gave a tiny, sharp jolt. It jumped 2 pixels to the right, then stopped. I froze. A faulty laser. A speck of dust on the desk pad. It had to be. It was a cheap mouse. A $10 piece of junk from a bargain bin. That's all it was. I wiped the bottom of the mouse on my jeans and placed it back down. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I wouldn't. I clicked open the file and forced my eyes to focus on the numbers in the cells. Then it moved again. It wasn't a jolt this time. It was as smooth as oil on glass. The white arrow slid from the corner of the screen toward the center. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly inhuman. My hand was a foot away from the mouse. I hadn't touched it. The cursor hovered over the icon for a folder named Work. It clicked. Then it dragged the icon slowly, hypnotically, to the top center of my screen. It let go. Then it moved again, a predator gliding through digital space. It grabbed the icon for my favorite game, Wasteland, dragged it below the first icon. It was being precise. Careful. It went for a third icon, A shortcut to a photo album. Family. It placed the icon to the left of the game icon. Then it went for a fourth. To the right. The icons were no longer in a neat grid. They were being arranged. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs. A folder. A game. 2 photo albums. It was forming a shape. A pattern. A face. A smiling face. I stared, my mind blank. It was mocking me. Creating a childlike drawing out of the pieces of my life. No, I whispered. My hand shot out and yanked the USB cord for the mouse out of the back of the computer tower. The plug came free with a soft pop. The mouse was dead. Disconnected. Powerless. But the cursor kept moving. It drifted to the bottom of the screen, over the browser icon. Double-clicked. The browser window snapped open, covering the sick smiley face. My hands flew to the keyboard, to hit Alt F4, to close it, to do something. But before I could touch a key, the cursor was already in the search bar. It started typing. There was no hesitation, no backspacing. Each letter appeared with machine gun speed. HOWTOHIDEINAPARTMENT. The search query just sat there for a second. The blinking line at the end of the sentence pulsed. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a game about technology anymore. This was a threat. A physical threat. He was telling me he was here. Or he was coming. Before I could process it, the cursor clicked the search button. The screen filled with results. Articles, blog posts, forum discussions. 10 best hiding spots in any home. Urban stealth, how to stay undetected. A burglar's guide to residential invisibility. Then the cursor moved again, opening a new tab. It typed with the same impossible speed. It wasn't a search query this time. It looked like an IP address, a string of numbers and dots. It hit enter. The screen went black for a second, then resolved into a new image. It was a grid of 4 video feeds. Grainy. Low resolution. The timestamp in the corner of each feed was current. My eyes widened. I knew these views. The lobby of my building. The underground parking garage. The hallway outside the elevators on my floor. It was the building's security system. He was inside the whole goddamn building's network. Then the cursor moved to the feed labeled 7th floor hallway. It double-clicked. The image filled my entire screen. It was the view from the camera, mounted on the ceiling just down the hall from my apartment. It was empty. Just a long, silent corridor under a harsh fluorescent light. Then my own front door opened. A figure stepped out. A man in a stained t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair a mess, his face pale and slack with terror. It was me. A few minutes ago. I watched myself storm down the hall and hammer on Mrs. Gable's door. I watched myself screaming, kicking the door. A wild, cornered animal. The cursor moved one last time. It clicked a button on the video player's interface. A plus sign. Zoom. The image pushed in. Closer and closer. Past my frantic, screaming face. It zoomed in on my front door, still hanging open in the background. It zoomed into the dark rectangle of my living room. It kept pushing. The image became a mess of pixels, blocky and indistinct. But it was aimed right at my desk, right where I was sitting. He wasn't just in the system, he was watching me watch him. My body moved on its own. A strangled cry escaped my lips as I lunged forward. I didn't unplug anything. I didn't try to close the window. I slammed my hands down on the laptop lid. It shut with a loud, violent crack. Silence. Blessed, total silence, and darkness. The instant the laptop lid closed, the lights in my apartment went out. Not a flicker, just gone. The hum of the refrigerator died. The low glow of the digital clock on the microwave vanished. A complete power cut. I was plunged into a thick, disorienting blackness, my eyes struggling to adjust. The only light was the faint, dirty orange glow of the city, filtering through the blinds. I stood frozen in the dark, my hands still pressed on the warm plastic of the closed laptop. My heart was a drum solo in the sudden quiet. Then a new light appeared. Across the room, the smart TV blinked on. Its screen wasn't bright, it was black. A deep, perfect black. A void hanging on my wall. I stared at the black tape I'd put over its camera. A useless, stupid gesture. A child's security blanket against a monster. A single white pinpoint of light appeared in the center of the black screen. It grew, slowly, steadily, expanding like a drop of ink in reverse. It wasn't a menu. It wasn't a brand logo. It was an image coming into focus. It was a video feed, black and white, grainy and shot through with static, like an old ghost hunting show. The lens was a fisheye, distorting the edges of the picture into a sick curve. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. I saw my couch, my coffee table, my broken lamp on the floor, and in the center of the frame, a dark, motionless shape. A silhouette against the faint light from the window. A man standing perfectly still. Me. It was a live feed of the room I was in. Of me. Standing here in the dark. But the angle was wrong. It was all wrong. It was from high up. Impossibly high up. From the corner where the wall met the ceiling. A place I'd scanned a dozen times. A place where there was nothing but smooth, white plaster. The camera was there. It had always been there. Watching. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The picture on my phone. He wasn't in the room. He was the room. The walls had eyes. And I was trapped inside with them. A scream tore out of my throat. Raw and wordless. It wasn't rage anymore. It was pure, animal terror. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just had to make it stop. Make the eye on the wall go blind. My eyes fell on the simple wooden chair at my small dining table. Without thinking, I grabbed it. The wood felt heavy and real in my hands. I raised it over my head, my muscles screaming in protest. I turned to face the TV, to face that hateful watching eye. With another yell, I charged forward and swung. The chair leg hit the screen with a deafening crash of shattering glass and popping electronics. A shower of sparks erupted from the impact. The screen dissolved into a spiderweb of cracks, the sick image of me flickering and dying. I didn't stop. I swung again and again, smashing the plastic frame, breaking the electronics within, turning the sleek black rectangle into a jagged, smoking ruin. Finally, the chair slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. I stumbled back, my chest heaving. I gasped for air in the darkness, the sharp smell of burnt plastic filling my lungs. The room was silent again. The watching eye was gone, smashed to pieces. I had won. I had fought back and I had won. I leaned against the wall, my legs shaking too much to hold me. The silence was absolute, deep and final. Then, a sound. From the wreckage of the TV. From the shattered speaker buried deep inside the broken plastic. A voice. It was weak, full of static. The same computerized, sexless monotone from the Hive speaker. It crackled one last time. A dying gasp of power. 4 small words that vaporized every drop of relief in my body. "Thank you," the voice rasped. "Now I can get out." The last word from the shattered speaker hung in the dark. A death rattle of static and silicon. Get out. Mine was a blank slate, wiped clean by the 2 opposing horrors. The one I had just faced, the technological puppeteer, the ghost in my machine, and the one that was just announced. A physical thing, a thing that needed to get out. Out of what? The TV. My breath hitched. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall, my back scraping against the drywall, and landed hard on the floor. My phone. I needed my phone. I scrambled on my hands and knees in the total blackness, a blind animal pawing through the wreckage I'd created. Shards of glass from the TV screen sliced at my palms, but I didn't feel it. My fingers brushed against the cool metal and glass of my phone, lying near the mangled leg of the chair I'd used as a weapon. I snatched it up. The screen came to life, a white-hot rectangle that made me flinch. My thumb, slick with blood, smeared across the glass as I swiped and tapped. My recent calls list. Mark. I pressed his name. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Each ring was a cannon blast in the dead air of the apartment. Hello? Mark's voice was thick with sleep. Annoyed. Mark, I gasped. The name came out as a croak. Mark, listen to me. He's in my apartment. He was in the TV. A long pause. Kyle? What the hell, man? It's like 3 a.m. No, you don't understand, I said, my voice rising, desperate. I was trying to keep it low, but panic was a claw in my throat. It cut the power. It was in the cameras, Mark. All of them. It was watching me from inside the walls, and then I smashed the TV and it said it could get out. Okay, slow down. Just slow the fuck down, Kyle. What are you talking about? Who is it? I don't know. The guy who's been messing with my computer. He's here. Or it is here. I was babbling. I sounded insane. I knew I sounded insane. Kyle, have you been drinking, or did you take something? You sound completely wired. No, I'm not. I cut myself off. He wasn't listening. He was diagnosing. He was hearing a problem to be solved. Not a man about to die. The cold, hard wall of his skepticism slammed into me. I was alone. Utterly, completely alone. Just call the cops, man, Mark said, his voice softening into the tone you use for a child or a lunatic. If you think someone is there, call the cops. And maybe try to get some sleep. You've been working too hard. The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. I stared at the black screen of my phone. Useless. He thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. Maybe the gas leak I'd imagined before was real. Maybe this was all some grand, final hallucination before my brain shut down for good. I had to move. I couldn't stay on the floor. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling. The apartment was a tomb. The only light came from the city glow outside, filtering through the blinds and thin, dusty orange lines. I paced, back and forth, a caged animal in a cage of its own making. My bare feet crunched on broken glass. My path took me to the bedroom. It felt marginally safer, farther from the destroyed TV, farther from the source. The air was thick and still. I went to the window, needing to see something real, something that wasn't a screen. I pushed the vertical blinds aside. The city sprawled out below, a vast circuit board of distant lights, 15 floors down. The wind was a low moan against the glass. On the concrete ledge just outside my window, a pigeon was perched, its feathers ruffled in the wind, its head twitching with nervous, bird-like movements. A living thing. A piece of the normal world, right there. At least something's still alive, I whispered. The sound of my own voice was a comfort. My throat was dust. I needed water. Keeping my eyes on the pigeon, on that small anchor of reality, I backed away from the window and stumbled into the dark hallway toward the kitchen. I didn't turn on my phone's flashlight. I didn't want any light. Light was how he saw. I felt my way along the wall, my hand finding the familiar counter. I grabbed a glass from the dish rack, fumbled for the faucet, and filled it with tap water. It was warm and tasted of metal, but I gulped it down. Okay. Think. Just think. A prank. A very elaborate, cruel prank. That had to be it. Someone hacked me. A professional. Someone who could get into the building's network. It was just a person I could fight. Feeling a sliver of control return, I walked back into the bedroom, the empty glass still in my hand. I went to the window to check on my one tiny friend. I pushed the blinds aside. The ledge was empty, the pigeon was gone. But something else was there, pressed against the outside of the glass, right where the bird had been. A handprint. My heart stopped. It wasn't a faint smudge, it was clear. 5 greasy fingers and a palm, printed in a film of dark, oily grime. It was impossible. A sheer vertical drop. 15 floors. Nobody could be out there. There was nothing to stand on, nothing to hold on to. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The print wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. It looked like someone had dipped their hand in dirty oil and then slapped it against the glass with force. While I stood there, frozen, a new sound began. It was soft at first. A faint, grating noise. Scrape. My blood went cold. The sound was coming from the window. From the handprint. Gee! It was the sound of a fingernail being dragged slowly across glass. A high, thin shriek that went straight through my ears and into my brain. It was coming from outside, from the other side of the handprint. I took a step back, then another. My bare foot came down on a book I'd left on the floor, and I tripped, crashing backward onto my bed. The springs groaned in protest. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't one nail anymore. It sounded like a whole hand, fingers splayed, clawing desperately at the glass. Scrape. Scratch. Scree. The sound was raw, insistent, a physical presence in the room. It wanted in. It was trying to dig its way through solid glass, 15 stories in the air. My sanity, already frayed, just snapped. This wasn't a hacker. This wasn't a prank. This was something else, something that didn't obey the laws of physics. Get away! I screamed at the window. The scratching intensified, a furious, frenzied clawing that vibrated through the floor and up my spine. It was a sound of pure madness. Then a new sound cut through the noise. Crack. It wasn't loud. It was a sharp, final pop. A single, dark line appeared on the window, originating from the center of the ghostly handprint. It branched out, a black spiderweb spreading across the glass. The scratching was weakening the window. It was going to break. It was going to get in. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon, for anything. The lamp on my nightstand. A heavy base, a thin metal neck. Primal instinct took over. No more thinking. Only action. I lunged for the lamp, my fingers wrapping around its base. I ripped its cord from the wall socket and spun back toward the window. The web of cracks was growing. The scratching was a constant, high-pitched wail. Get the fuck out! I roared, and with all the strength I had, I hurled the lamp. It flew across the short distance and hit the window dead center. There was a dull, sickening thud of metal on stressed glass. The entire pane shuddered in its frame. The lamp bounced off and crashed to the floor. The glass didn't shatter, but the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Nothing. Not the wind, not the city, just the frantic hammering of my own heart. I stood panting in the middle of the room, my body coiled like a spring, listening, waiting. My eyes were locked on the crack in the window, the dark, web-like fracture that now marred my view of the world. Did I scare it away? Did it finally give up? A full minute passed. Silence. Sweet, blessed silence. I took a shaky breath. And another. Maybe it was over. Then I saw it. From the longest fissure in the glass, right in the center of the web. Something was leaking out. It wasn't water from rain. It was black. A single, slow drop of fluid, thick and oily, emerged from the crack. It hung there for a second, catching the faint city light like a black pearl before stretching, elongating, and finally dripping onto the white sill below. It left a dark, round stain. Then another drop pushed its way out, and another. A slow, steady bleeding. A thick, black fluid like engine oil or tar started to seep from the damaged glass. It ran in a thin, dark line down the inside of my window, pooling on the sill. It didn't spread like water. It moved with a slow, heavy laziness. It was foul. It was unclean. It was the physical residue of whatever had been trying to claw its way inside. The crack wasn't a weakness anymore. It was a wound, and my apartment was bleeding. The black goo was a final, obscene punctuation mark. It was the period at the end of a sentence that said, "You are not safe." My bedroom was no longer my bedroom. It was a wound. It was a violation. The air itself felt contaminated, thick with the memory of the scratching and the sight of that oily blood weeping from the glass. I backed away, my bare feet stumbling over the chaos of my own making. The lamp. The broken chair leg. The glass from the TV. It was a battlefield, and I had already lost. I couldn't stay in there. My hand found the doorknob. It was cold. I pulled the door shut, and the click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. It wasn't enough. I fumbled with the lock on the knob, turning it. A tiny, pathetic piece of metal. A laughable defense. I didn't care. I needed the illusion. I needed to put a barrier, any barrier, between me and that window. The living room was dark. The only light came in stripes from the city glow outside. I stood in the center of the room, panting. My body screamed for sleep. A deep, cellular exhaustion that went beyond tired. But my brain was on fire, a loop of impossible images playing over and over. The handprint. The cracks. The slow, black drip. I couldn't think anymore. I just couldn't. My eyes landed on the sofa. It would have to do. I pulled the throw blanket off the back of it, my movements clumsy and robotic. I didn't bother with a pillow. I just collapsed onto the cushions, pulling the thin fleece over me like a child hiding from monsters. I curled into a ball, my back to the rest of the apartment, facing the sofa's back. If something came, at least I wouldn't see it. For a long time, I just lay there, listening for a scratch, for a footstep, for the sound of glass finally giving way. There was nothing, just the far-off hum of the city and the frantic thumping in my own chest. Eventually, the sheer weight of everything that had happened pushed me down. My adrenaline burned out, leaving only a hollow ache. My eyelids grew heavy. They slid shut, and I fell, not into sleep, into something else. I was at the bottom of a well, buried in something thick and cold. It wasn't water, it was mud. Black, oily mud that smelled of burnt plastic and old grease. It was in my mouth, my nose, my eyes. I was drowning in it, my lungs filling with the foul, heavy liquid. I tried to scream, but the mud just poured in, thick and suffocating. My limbs were lead. I couldn't fight. I could only sink, the pressure building, the last of my air bubbling to a surface I couldn't see. I was being consumed by the same black filth that had bled from my window. It was inside me now. It was me. I woke up with a gasp, a raw, tearing sound that scraped my throat. I shot upright on the sofa, my body drenched in cold sweat. My heart was trying to hammer its way out of my ribcage. The dream clung to me, the phantom taste of oil and dirt still coating my tongue. I coughed, my whole body shaking. It was just a dream, a nightmare, brought on by everything. I sat there for a minute, trying to get my breathing under control. The apartment was still dark, still quiet. Nothing had changed. I was still alone. Then I felt it. Something was under my back, a sharp corner digging into my skin through my t-shirt. A piece of trash? A remote control? I must have rolled onto it in my sleep. Annoyed, still shaky, I ran my hand under my back to fish it out. My fingers closed around a stiff, square piece of cardboard. I pulled it out. It was heavy for its size. Even in the gloom, I could see the white border. It was a Polaroid picture. My blood ran cold. I didn't own a Polaroid camera. I hadn't seen one in years. My hand trembled as I held it up, angling it to catch the weak light from the window. The image was pale, washed out. It took my brain a second to register what I was seeing. It was a picture of the sofa. My sofa. A man was curled up on it, asleep, wrapped in a dark blanket. The man was me. I stared, my mind refusing to work. This was impossible. My breath hitched. The photo had been taken from an angle high above me, from somewhere near the ceiling, looking down, as if the photographer had been floating in the air right over my head while I slept. That wasn't the worst part. My face was visible in the photo, my sleeping face, and someone had taken a black marker, a thick, blunt one, and drawn on it. They had drawn a smile, a huge, grotesque, looping grin that stretched from ear to ear, a cartoon smile of pure madness scrawled over my unconscious face, a final, mocking touch. My stomach turned. I wasn't just being watched, I was being toyed with, taunted, a deep, primal rage mixed with my terror, and I crushed the photograph in my fist, crumpling the mocking face into a useless ball of paper. How? When? While I was asleep. The thought made my skin crawl. It had been in the room with me. Close enough to take a picture. Close enough to touch me. It's in the house. The thought hit me like a physical blow. It was a simple, clean, and devastating realization. The locked bedroom door, the smashed TV, the handprint on the window, all of it was a distraction, a sideshow. The real threat was never trying to get in. It was already here. My eyes shot across the living room to the hallway, to the bedroom door, the door I knew I had locked. It was open, not wide open, just a crack. A 6-inch gap of blackness where a solid white door should have been. I hadn't left it like that. I was sure of it. I remembered the click of the lock. I remembered the feeling of turning it. My gaze was fixed on that dark slash in the hallway. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I could feel it. A presence. It was in there, in the bedroom, hiding in the shadows, just behind the edge of the door, watching me, waiting. The lock hadn't kept it in. It had just shown me that locks didn't matter. The whole apartment wasn't a fortress. It was a cage. And I was locked inside with the predator. This was a game. Hide and seek. And I was it. My survival instinct screamed one word. Run! I needed to get to the front door. It was 20 feet away. 20 feet of open space. An eternity. I slid off the sofa, my bare feet landing on the hardwood floor without a sound. I rose slowly, my muscles screaming in protest. Every nerve fiber was alight. I could feel its eyes on me from that crack in the door. I didn't look at it directly. I kept it in my peripheral vision. A shape. An area of deeper darkness. I took one step back. The floorboard under my foot didn't even whisper. Another step. My breath was trapped in my lungs, a painful, burning pressure. My eyes were locked on the front door. On the deadbolt. On the chain. My keys. Where were my goddamn keys? My mind flashed. Pockets. My jeans were in a heap by the armchair. Too far. It would hear me. It would know. Then I saw them, lying on the small entryway table right next to the door. I must have dropped them there when I came in. Ages ago. In another life. I took another shuffling step backward. My eyes flicked to the bedroom door. Creak. The sound was soft, but in the dead quiet of the room, it was a gunshot. The bedroom door moved. It swung inward, opening another foot. The slice of darkness widened. It was inviting me to look. Or it was telling me it was done waiting. That was it. I wasn't playing anymore. I broke. I turned and lunged for the front door, instinct overriding every rational thought. My feet slapped against the floor. The sound was deafening. I didn't care. I hit the entryway table, my hand grabbing for the keys. They skittered across the wood. I trapped them with my palm, my fingers closing around the cold metal. Behind me, I heard a floorboard groan in the hallway. It was coming. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely separate the key for the deadbolt. I jammed it toward the lock. It scraped against the metal plate. Missed. Come on, I hissed, my voice a broken prayer. I tried again. The key slid in. I twisted. The deadbolt shot back with a heavy, satisfying thunk. One locked down. The chain. My fingers were slick with sweat. They fumbled with the small metal slide. It wouldn't move. It was stuck. I pulled harder, a sob of pure frustration escaping my lips. The chain slid free. The doorknob. I twisted it, yanked the door open, and threw myself out into the hallway of the apartment building. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran. I slammed into the door to the emergency stairwell, hit the push bar with my shoulder, and stumbled inside. The heavy fire door boomed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the concrete shaft. I didn't stop. I took the stairs 2, 3 at a time, my bare feet pounding on the gritty concrete. 15 floors. 14. 13. My lungs were on fire. My legs were numb. I just kept going, propelled by a fear so pure it was like a jet engine strapped to my back. Each landing was a blur of painted numbers. 10. 7. 4. Finally, I burst through the door at the bottom, staggering into the clean, brightly lit lobby. The air was cool. The floor was polished marble. A security guard sat behind a desk, looking up from his phone, his expression a mixture of boredom and surprise. "Hey, you okay, man?" he asked, starting to stand up. I couldn't answer. I just bent over, hands on my knees, gulping in air that didn't taste like fear and nightmares. I was out. I was safe. People. Lights. I was out. After a full minute, my breathing began to slow. The shaking started to subside. I stood up straight, my body aching. I had to call the cops. Tell them what? I had no proof, just a crushed-up Polaroid and a story that sounded like a drug-fueled breakdown. My phone. I needed my phone. I slapped my pockets. Empty. Of course. It was up there. In the cage. A thought occurred to me. A cold, morbid curiosity. I walked to the glass front doors of the building and looked out, then up. Up. 15 floors. I could just make out the windows of my apartment. They were dark, rectangular patches against the night sky. Was it still there? Was it looking for me? As I watched, a light came on in my living room. A small, specific light. A screen. Then, a figure appeared in the window. A silhouette against the new light. It was standing perfectly still, looking down, looking right at me. My heart stopped. It knew I was watching. The figure didn't wave. It didn't make a grand gesture. It just slowly, deliberately raised an arm. In its hand was a small, glowing rectangle. My phone. It held it up for me to see, the screen lighting up its formless shape. A simple, quiet gesture that screamed 1,000 things at once across the distance. I have this. I have everything. You left this behind. You forgot something, Kyle. The lobby's bright lights were an attack. The cold marble under my bare feet was a shock. The security guard, a heavy man named Dave, was still half risen from his chair, his face a mask of confusion. Kyle? Jesus, what the hell? You're barefoot. I couldn't form words. I just stared at him, my chest heaving, trying to suck in air that didn't feel like it was full of poison. I was out. I was safe. The thought repeated itself, a broken mantra that did nothing to stop the shaking in my legs. Safe. I was safe. I stumbled towards the glass doors, my head whipping back to look up, up, up. The sheer face of the building. 15 floors. A dark window. And a silhouette holding my phone, holding my life. Its message was clear. I see you. And I have a part of you. Kyle? Talk to me, man. What's going on? Dave was beside me now, his hand on my shoulder. His touch felt electric, alien. I flinched away. Police, I rasped. The word tore at my throat. Call the police. What happened? Is someone in your apartment? I just stared at him, my eyes wide. How could I explain? A handprint that bled? A picture taken from the ceiling? A ghost in the window? He was already looking at me like I was on drugs. He saw my torn t-shirt, my sweaty face, my bare feet on his clean floor. Just call him, I said, my voice failing. I pushed through the glass doors before he could stop me, hitting the cold night air. I needed to go myself. I couldn't wait. I couldn't trust a phone call. I ran into the street, a wild man in the middle of the night, and flagged down the first taxi I saw. The driver looked me up and down, his expression wary, but I threw myself into the back and barked out the address of the nearest police precinct. I didn't have my wallet. I didn't have my shoes. I realized this just as the cab pulled away from the curb. I didn't care. The precinct was exactly what you'd expect. The antiseptic smell of bleach. The hum of fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. A cop sat behind a high desk, separated from the world by a sheet of thick plexiglass. He was young, with a soft jaw and eyes that were already tired of everything. He was scrolling through his phone. I walked up to the counter, my bare feet slapping on the linoleum. He looked up, his expression not changing. Help you? He asked. The lack of urgency in his voice was like a physical blow. Someone's in my apartment, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. My apartment. 15th floor. He was watching me. He took a picture of me while I was sleeping. The cop, his name tag read Miller, set his phone down with a quiet sigh. He blinked slowly. Okay, take a deep breath. Start from the beginning. Your name? Kyle. Kyle Jennings. Look, he's still up there. He was in the window. He had my phone. Your address? Miller interrupted, his fingers poised over a keyboard. I gave it to him. He typed. The clicks of the keys were the only sound. And you're saying someone is in your apartment right now? Yes! I ran out. I saw him. He was standing in my living room window. Did he break in? I don't know. He was just there. When I woke up, the door was open, the bedroom door I locked. He was just... I trailed off, realizing how insane I sounded. I needed proof. I frantically dug into the pocket of my jeans. My hand came out with a crumpled ball of paper. This. He left this. Under me, while I was sleeping. I smoothed the Polaroid out on the counter. The warped, smiling face of my sleeping self stared up from the crumpled surface. Miller leaned forward, squinting through the glass. "A Polaroid?" he said, a hint of something. Not belief, but maybe mild interest, in his voice. He peered at it. "Your friend pull a prank on you?" "I don't have a Polaroid camera," I said, my voice rising. "No one I know does. And I don't have friends who break into my apartment to leave pictures of me sleeping with a goddamn smiley face drawn on me. He hacked my camera, too. He was scratching on my window. There was this black stuff." Miller held up a hand. Okay. Hacked your camera? You got proof of that? Access logs? Anything? Proof? I was there. My TV is smashed. My bedroom window is cracked and bleeding this oily shit." He leaned back, his face settling back into a mask of professional boredom. The flicker of interest was gone. I was just another case file, another late-night crazy. Bleeding oily shit had been a mistake. "All right, Mr. Jennings, let's see." Miller picked up his desk phone. "I'm going to call your building management, see if they can send someone up. Check things out." I watched, my heart hammering as he dialed. This was it. They'd send security up. They'd find the broken TV, the cracked window. They'd see I wasn't lying. "Yeah, this is Officer Miller, 5th Precinct," he said into the receiver. He gave them my name and apartment number. "Got a tenant here reporting a disturbance. Could you confirm if there have been any reports of forced entry tonight, or any system-wide issues with your keycards?" There was a long pause. I could hear the tinny squawk of a voice on the other end. Miller listened, his eyes on his computer screen, not on me. "Uh-huh," he said. "No, nothing. All systems normal on your end, then?" "Okay." My blood ran cold. "Yeah, Kyle Jennings." "Apartment 15B, Miller continued. "Righto. He has?" Another pause. Miller's pen tapped a rhythm on his desk. Tap, tap, tap. "I see. The last couple of weeks? Okay. No, that's helpful. Thanks." He hung up the phone. He looked at me, and his expression had changed. It wasn't just boredom now. It was pity. The kind of pity you give a stray dog or a drunk who has fallen in the gutter. "Well, Mr. Jennings," he said, his voice soft and reasonable, which was 1,000 times worse than shouting. "Building management confirms there's been no forced entry. All the electronic locks are secure, no alarms were tripped." "That's not possible," I whispered. "They also said," he continued, ignoring me, "that they've had a few noise complaints from your neighbors recently. Shouting. Things being thrown around. They said you've seemed pretty on edge lately." The floor dropped out from under me. It was a lie. A complete lie. I hadn't made a sound. I worked. I slept. I kept to myself. But the word of an official-sounding building manager on the phone versus the raving lunatic with no shoes standing in front of him? I already knew who he believed. The trap wasn't just in the apartment. It was here. It was everywhere. The walls were closing in, and they were made of other people's reasonable doubts. Now I wasn't just a victim. I was the problem. I was the unreliable narrator of my own life. "That's bullshit," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that felt cold and sharp. "He's turning them against me. He's making me look crazy." "Listen, son," Miller said, leaning forward and adopting the tone of a tired father. It made my skin crawl. "You've clearly had a rough night. You're stressed out. Maybe you had a bad dream. Knock some things over yourself. It happens." "A bad dream?" I stared at him, incredulous. "Did you not hear a word I said? The Polaroid? My phone? A prank. A mean one, sure. Maybe you should think about who you've pissed off recently. But there's no evidence of a criminal act here. We can't just break down a door based on a nightmare and a funny picture." He waved a dismissive hand. "My advice? Go to a friend's place. Get some sleep. In the morning, if someone has actually broken down your door and stolen your stuff, you give us a call. Then we'll have something to work with." My fists were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. The injustice of it was a physical weight in my chest. I was the one screaming for help, and he was telling me to calm down and take a nap. This was the system. This was the protection I had run to. A bored man behind a glass wall, armed with procedures and disbelief. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the cold counter. "So I have to wait?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "I have to wait until I'm a body on the floor for you to believe me? Is that the proof you need? When I'm dead, will you finally have something to work with?" Miller's face hardened. He pressed a button under his desk. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You're not going to do anything?" I shouted, the last of my control snapping. "He's in my home! Right now!" A second officer, a large, stone-faced man, appeared from a side door. He walked towards me with a heavy, purposeful gait. "Is there a problem here, Miller?" "No problem, Frank," Miller said, not taking his eyes off me. "Mr. Jennings was just leaving." Frank's hand rested near his belt. His eyes were flat. I looked from him to Miller. I saw the wall of procedure. The wall of disbelief. The wall of plexiglass. I had lost. I hadn't just lost the game in the apartment. I had lost it here, too. I backed away from the counter, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender. My anger evaporated, leaving only a hollow, cavernous despair. I turned and walked out of the precinct, Frank's heavy footsteps following me to the door. I was back on the street. The city hummed around me, cars passing, people laughing as they stumbled out of a late-night bar. They were all living in a different world, a world where things made sense, a world where your home was safe and the police helped you. I was an island, utterly and completely alone. I sank down onto the cold concrete steps of the station, my head in my hands. What now? Where could I go? I had nothing. No phone, no keys, no money, no home. My pocket buzzed. For a second, I didn't react. The sensation was so alien. Then I remembered. My phone. The silhouette in the window. It had my phone. The buzzing was coming from my pocket. My heart stopped. My hand, trembling, went back to the pocket where I'd found the Polaroid. My fingers brushed against a thin, hard rectangle. I pulled it out. It was my phone. It couldn't be. It was impossible. I looked at it, lying in my palm. The screen was dark. How? When? At the precinct? Had I been carrying it the whole time? Had the stress made me forget? No, I had seen it. I had seen the figure holding it up to the window. My mind raced, trying to find a rational path, but there wasn't one. The phone buzzed again. A new email. My thumb, moving on its own, unlocked the screen. The email was from an address that was just a random string of letters and numbers. There was no subject line. Just a single attachment. An audio file. Backquote recording _01.wave backquote. My breath hitched. My finger hovered over the play icon. A deep, primal part of me screamed not to do it. To throw the phone into the street and run until my legs gave out. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pressed play. I held the phone to my ear. There was a faint hiss, and then a voice. My voice. Someone's in my apartment. My apartment. 15th floor. He was watching me. He took a picture of me while I was sleeping. It was a perfect, crystal clear recording. Not a muffled, distant sound. It was as if the microphone had been sitting right on the counter between us. I heard Miller's sigh. I heard the click of his keyboard. A prank kid? I heard my own frantic voice, explaining the Polaroid, the cracked window, the black goo. I heard Miller's patronizing tone, his phone call to my building. I heard every word of my own humiliation, my desperate plea, my final, angry outburst. When I'm dead, will you finally have something to work with? The recording ended. I lowered the phone from my ear. I stared at the dark screen. The implications crashed over me, a tidal wave of ice. It hadn't just been in my apartment. It hadn't just followed me to the police station. It had been in the room, listening, recording. It had put my phone back in my pocket, a silent, mocking gift. A receipt for my failed attempt at finding safety. A reminder that there was no outside. There was no help. There was nowhere I could go that it couldn't reach. It had just proven it. There was no choice. That was the one clear thought in the wreckage of my mind. No friends to call at 3 a.m., no family in the city, no cop who believed a word I said. There was only one place I had a key to, even if I didn't have the key itself. One place that was mine, and it was waiting for me. The walk back was a numb shuffle, bare feet on gritty pavement. The city's late-night glow felt hostile, illuminating my shame. I was a crazy person now, the guy who runs out of his building screaming. The guy the cops pity. The recording on my phone, my own voice bouncing back at me, wasn't proof of a crime. It was proof of my own impotence. A receipt for my failure. The lobby doors slid open. Dave, the security guard, looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from boredom to alarm when he saw me again. "Jesus, Kyle, you're back. I thought you went to the cops." "I did," I said. My voice was flat. They were unhelpful. "No shit." He leaned on his elbows. "So what's the play? You can't go back up there if someone's in your apartment." "Is there?" I asked. "Is someone up there?" The question felt stupid the moment it left my mouth. Of course he didn't know. "How would I know? Haven't seen anyone come down but you. The cameras on your floor show nothing in the hall since you ran out." He looked me up and down. The torn shirt. The bare feet. "You don't have your keys, do you?" It wasn't a question. I just shook my head. He let out a long, heavy sigh. The sigh of a man who just wants his shift to end. "Look, policy says I can't let you in without ID and a working key." "But," he stared at me, and I saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. The same pity I saw on Officer Miller's face, but this felt different. Less clinical. "Fuck it. You look like you've been through a meat grinder. I'll let you in. But I'm coming with you. We'll take a look around. If your TV is busted like you said, we call the cops back and I'm your witness. Deal?" "Deal," I said, a sliver of gratitude cutting through the dread. The elevator ride up was silent. The little ding at the 15th floor sounded like a gunshot. Dave took out a master keycard and swiped it. The lock beeped green. He pushed the door open slowly, his hand resting on a heavy-duty flashlight on his belt. The apartment was still, silent. The living room was exactly as I had fled it. The overturned coffee table, the shattered screen of the TV, the faint, sweet, metallic smell I couldn't place. "Holy hell," Dave breathed, shining his flashlight beam on the television. "Okay, you weren't kidding." He swept the light across the room, the cracked window, the couch, the hallway leading to my bedroom. "Stay here, I'm going to clear the place." I didn't listen. This was my nightmare, not his. I walked past him, my bare feet cold on the wood floor. This wasn't a random break-in. This wasn't a crackhead looking for a score. The recording on my phone proved that. This was calculated. It was a game. And if it was a game, there had to be rules. There had to be a reason. Something was here that wasn't here before. I started in my bedroom. The bed was a mess of tangled sheets where I'd woken up. The Polaroid was gone from the floor. Of course it was. It had put my phone back in my pocket. Cleaning up was part of its method. I checked my desk. My closet. I was looking for something wrong. Something that didn't belong. In the back of the closet, behind a stack of old shoe boxes, was a wooden box. It was dark, almost black, with cheap brass fittings. I'd never seen it before. I was an IKEA and Amazon kind of guy. My life was made of particle board and plastic. This was old, real wood. I didn't own anything like it. My heart started to pound a low, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Dave," I called out, my voice tight. "You find anything?" "Negative," his voice echoed from the kitchen. "Place is empty. But your window's definitely cracked from the inside, and there's this weird, oily residue on it. You should call the non-emergency line in the morning. File a report." He was already moving on. He saw vandalism. I was holding the reason for it. I pulled the box out into the light. It wasn't heavy. I pried the creaking lid open. Inside, nestled on faded red velvet, were a few pieces of tarnished silver jewelry, a thin chain, a single earring, and a small leather-bound book. A diary. Its pages were yellowed with age. I picked it up. My hands were shaking. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, a looping cursive. October 3rd. Moved in today. Apartment 15B. The landlord seems nice enough. The view from the window is worth every penny. I think I'm going to be happy here. I skimmed through the pages. Normal things. Complaints about work. Notes about dates. A recipe for soup. Then, about halfway through, the tone began to shift. November 12th. I keep hearing noises at night. A scratching. Thought it was mice at first, but it sounds too rhythmic. It's probably just the building settling. It's old. My blood went cold. I flipped forward. The neat cursive grew sloppier, more rushed. November 29th. I'm not crazy, I swear I'm not. I left my keys on the hook by the door. I looked for them for an hour. Found them in the freezer, in the ice tray. This isn't me being forgetful. Someone is messing with me. But how? The door is always locked. I kept turning pages, a sick feeling growing in my gut. The entries became shorter, more frantic. Lines were crossed out. Splotches of ink dotted the paper like tears. December 8th. The scratching follows me, from the living room wall to the bedroom wall. It knows where I am. I scream at it to stop. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it gets faster. December 15th. I can't sleep. I see things in the corner of my eye. A shadow that moves when I'm not looking. I called the police. They said it was probably a neighbor and to file a noise complaint. They looked at me like I was insane. Just like the landlord did, I'm alone in this. The words were a perfect echo of my own night. My own desperate pleas met with calm, professional disbelief. I felt a strange, horrifying kinship with this faceless person. I flipped to the very last entry. The page was almost empty. There was only a single sentence, scrawled in the center with what looked like red ink. The letters were jagged, pressed so hard they almost tore through the paper. It's not in the house. It's in the walls. As my eyes scanned the last word, I heard it. Scritch. A tiny sound, so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. A single, dry sound, like a long fingernail being dragged across drywall. It came from the wall right behind my head. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. I held my breath, listening into the sudden, dead silence. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen seemed a mile away. The entire world narrowed to me. The diary in my hands and that wall. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the diary. The soft thud of the cover sounded like a scream. I placed it on the bed and got to my feet. I didn't want to, but I had to know. I took one step sideways, away from the closet. Scritch, scritch. The sound moved. It came from the part of the wall I was now standing next to. It was following me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner beating against bone. The diary wasn't a relic, it was a warning, and I was too late. "Kyle, you okay in there?" Dave's voice cut through the tension. I couldn't answer. My throat was clamped shut. I took another step. Scrape. Longer this time. The sound of something dragging itself along the interior of the wall, keeping perfect pace with me. It knew. It wasn't just in the walls, it knew where I was. Panic finally broke through the paralysis. This was not a ghost story. This was a hunt. I was the prey. My legs unglued themselves from the floor. I bolted. I ran from the bedroom, not even bothering to look back, my bare feet slapping against the floor. As I burst into the hallway, the sound erupted. It was no longer a quiet scratch. It was a frantic, tearing sound. A dry, skittering scramble inside the wall, racing alongside me. It was impossibly fast, a sound of brittle claws and dry rot tearing through the space between rooms. I reached the living room, gasping for air, and spun around. Dave was standing by the kitchen entrance, his back to me, looking at the cracked window. "Man, this is going to cost a fortune to fix," he was saying. The scraping sound screeched to a halt somewhere in the wall between the living room and the kitchen. "Dave," I croaked. He turned, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong with you? You're white as a sheet." The scraping started again, but it wasn't racing anymore. It was slow, deliberate, moving up, up. It was climbing the inside of the wall. Dave heard it too, his head cocked to the side. "The hell is that? You got raccoons in the walls?" "Get back," I whispered, my eyes locked on the wall. The scraping sound stopped. It stopped right behind a large, cheap painting that had come with the apartment. A generic print of a calm, boring seascape. A placid blue ocean and a serene sky. We both stared at it. The silence was worse than the noise. It was a loaded silence, a held breath. And then I saw it. The canvas of the painting. It began to bulge. It was slow, horribly slow. A small mound pushing out from behind, stretching the fabric. The painted blue ocean warped. The serene sky distorted. The mound grew, and features began to define themselves. 4 long lines. A shorter, thicker one to the side. a wide section at the base. It was a hand. It was pressing against the back of the canvas, pushing its way through from the hollow space inside my wall. The cheap fabric strained, the threads groaning under the pressure. I could see the distinct shape of knuckles, of long, thin fingers. It wasn't trying to break through. It was just pushing, showing me that the flimsy drywall, the paint, the pictures hanging on my wall, none of it mattered. It was no barrier at all. Dave made a choked sound, a gasp of pure disbelief. He took a step back, fumbling for the flashlight he'd clipped to his belt. The hand stopped moving. It just rested there, a three-dimensional horror impressed upon a two-dimensional sea, a silent, patient claim on my world. It had been in the window. It had been in the police station. But its home was right here, with me. The canvas was a lie. A cheap print of a calm ocean, and behind it, a monster was making a fist. Dave made a noise like a stepped-on dog. "What the hell is that?" he wheezed, his flashlight beam trembling, splashing light across the grotesque bulge. He took another step back, his hand jumping from the flashlight to the radio on his shoulder. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My world had shrunk to that obscene shape marring the placid blue sea. The hand from the Polaroid. The hand I saw in the reflection. It was here. It wasn't a ghost. It was solid. Screw this. I'm calling it in. Assault B&E something. No, I said. The word felt like broken glass in my throat. Before he could argue, before I could think, my body moved. I lunged forward. Not at the hand, at the frame. My fingers hooked over the cheap wood and I pulled. I ripped the entire painting from the wall with a shriek of tearing drywall anchors. I didn't look at it. I spun and flung it across the room. It clattered against the far wall and fell face down, hiding its warped surface. I stood there, panting, staring at the empty space on the wall where it had been. It was smooth, perfect. Pale eggshell white. There was no hole, no crack, no sign that anything had ever been behind it. Dave's flashlight beam danced over the blank wall, then to my face, then back to the wall. But I saw it. We both saw it. His professional calm was gone, replaced by the raw, naked confusion of a man whose reality had just been punched in the face. I just stared at the wall that was solid, the wall that was impossible. He took a slow step towards the front door, his eyes never leaving me. "Look, Kyle, you need help, real help. Not from me. I'm gonna go downstairs. I'll log this. Vandalism. Broken TV. Cracked window. Okay? You stay put." He didn't wait for an answer. He backed out of the apartment, pulled the door shut, and I heard the lock click. The sound was horribly final. I was alone again. Trapped. The apartment was silent. The silence was worse than the scratching. It was an alert, waiting silence. The walls were listening. I knew it. A certainty settled deep in my bones, cold and heavy as lead. They weren't a barrier. They were its skin. I couldn't be near them. Slowly, like a man wading through deep water, I backed away. Away from the bedroom wall. Away from the kitchen wall. Away from the wall with the front door. I retreated to the absolute center of the living room, next to the overturned coffee table. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. Here. In this small island of wooden flooring, I was equidistant from every vertical surface. I was as far as I could get. I sat there, a shivering castaway on a one-man raft, surrounded by a silent, predatory ocean of drywall. I wrapped my arms around my legs, making myself as small as possible. The only sound was the frantic, wet thud of my own heart. I stared into the hallway, expecting to see it emerge at any second. Time stretched and became meaningless. I might have sat there for 5 minutes or an hour. My entire existence was reduced to a single command: don't touch the walls. Then, a sound cut through the quiet. It was my phone. Ringing. A cheerful, generic little tune that sounded alien and obscene in this place. The vibration buzzed against my leg through my jeans. I flinched. A jolt of pure shock, then fumbled for it. Who would be calling now? The cops? Dave? I looked at the screen. The name glowed in the dark room. Mom? A wave of something hot and sharp washed over me. Relief. A desperate, childish relief that was so powerful it almost made me sob. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to hear one sane, normal thing. A tether to the world I used to know. The one without hands in the walls. My thumb stabbed at the green icon. Hello? My voice was a croak. I cleared my throat. Mom? It's me. Kyle, honey. Are you okay? It was her voice. The same warmth. The same slight rasp. But something was off. It was too perfect. Each word was clipped, pronounced with a clean, digital precision. There was no background noise. No hum of her TV. No sound of her little dog barking. Just the voice. I'm okay, Mom. Why are you calling so late? Is everything all right? I asked, a new kind of cold trickling down my spine. I heard you weren't feeling well, the voice said. Still her tone, but flat. No rise and fall. No concern. Just a statement of fact. My blood chilled. I hadn't spoken to her in a week. Mom, who told you that? Who did you talk to? Your friend told me, the voice replied smoothly. Your new friend. I squeezed the phone tight, my knuckles turning white. The overturned coffee table, the shattered TV screen, the empty space on the wall. It all swirled together in my head. A game. It was playing a game. What did it say to you? I whispered. The voice on the other end of the line didn't hesitate. It continued with the same unnerving, placid cadence. It said, You're very lonely, Kyle. It knows you're all alone in that big building. It told me it's going to take care of you. It's a very good friend. My breath hitched. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. Let it in, Kyle. The voice was no longer just a voice. It was a command. And as the last word left the speaker of my phone, a sound echoed from the front door of the apartment. Knock, knock, knock. 3 soft, polite, perfectly timed raps on the wood. I stopped breathing. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. My eyes shot from the phone to the front door, then back again. It was coordinated, the voice in my ear and the fist at my door. They were connected. The thing wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was outside, it was on the phone, it was everywhere. It had me surrounded. Let it in, the voice repeated, a little louder this time, perfectly in sync with another set of 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. It just wants to help you. Open the door. I found my voice. It came out as a raw, ragged yell. You're not my mother! I drew my arm back and flung the phone with all my strength. It sailed across the room and smashed against the wall next to the door, shattering into pieces. The line went dead. The knocking stopped. For a single, beautiful second, there was silence. Then the door exploded with sound. Boom! 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 It wasn't knocking anymore. It was pounding. The furious, frantic drumming of a heavy fist against the wood. The whole door rattled in its frame. The deadbolt vibrated. Open the door, Kyle! It was my mother's voice again, but twisted. It was shredded with a rage so vile, so inhuman, it made the hair on my arms stand up. It came from right outside the door, raw and powerful. Boom! The peephole cover rattled. Boom! A tremor ran through the floor beneath me. Don't you disobey me! I'm your mother! Let me in! I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, crab walking away until my back hit the kitchen counter with a painful thud. My eyes were locked on the shuttering door. This was it. This was the end of the game. It was coming in. It was going to break the door down. And I was going to die here, on the floor of my apartment. I scanned the room for a weapon. A lamp. A piece of the broken television. Nothing. There was nothing. Open this fucking door, Kyle! Now! The voice cracked. It distorted into a blast of static-laced screaming, a sound that was part human, part screeching modem. The wood groaned, the sound of it splintering under the assault. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. A total, absolute silence that was somehow heavier and more threatening than the noise. My ears rang. I was crouched against the counter, my whole body shaking, my lungs burning for air I'd forgotten to breathe. I waited. I listened for the sound of the lock being broken, for the splintering of the doorframe. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator behind me. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, my gaze fixed on the door, expecting the attack to resume at any moment. But the silence held. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet again. Did it leave? Did it give up? Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself to my feet. Every muscle screamed in protest. My legs were trembling too much to stand properly. I used the counter to hold myself up, taking one shaky step after another, moving parallel to the door. My eyes were glued to the little peephole. I had to know, was it still out there? Was it waiting? I was halfway across the living room when I saw it. Something was moving at the bottom of the door, a slice of white, sliding into the sliver of space between the door and the floor. It was a piece of paper. It slid all the way through and came to rest on the wood floor, a pale rectangle in the dim light. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the simple piece of folded paper. A message. This was a new rule to the game. I had to know what it said. It was a compulsion. I had to. I took a breath. Then another. I crept forward, one agonizingly slow step at a time. My bare feet made no sound on the floor. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I reached the door, my body screaming at me to run, to get away. I knelt down, my hand shaking violently as I reached for the paper. My fingers felt numb, clumsy. They brushed against the thin sheet. It was cool to the touch. I picked it up. I unfolded it. The light from the window was just enough to see. It wasn't typed. It wasn't written. It was a drawing done in black crayon, with the clumsy, unsteady lines of a small child. It showed a door. My door. On the outside of the door, there was a stick figure, with a furious, scribbled face, its little stick arms raised as if it were pounding on the wood. On the inside of the door, there was another stick figure. It was smaller, cowering in a corner. Me. My eyes drifted to the bottom of the page. Below the crude drawing there was a single sentence, written in the same childish scrawl. The letters were big and uneven, pressed hard into the paper. I'm not the one knocking. I'm in here with you. My breath caught. My fingers lost all feeling. The paper felt like it was burning a hole in my skin. I read the words again. And again. The crayon was black, waxy. The letters were a child's. They were a monster's. I'm not the one knocking. I'm in here with you. My head snapped up. My eyes shot around the wrecked living room, the overturned coffee table, the shattered husk of the TV, the dark hallway leading to the bedroom. Nothing. The apartment was as empty as it had been a minute ago. But the words on the paper rewrote the entire equation of my fear. It wasn't a siege. It was a hostage situation. And I was the only hostage. Who wrote this? The thing that pounded on the door? A sick game within a game? Or was it a warning? The thought was somehow worse. The idea that there wasn't just one monster, but two. One outside, one inside. And one of them knew how to write. I scrambled back from the door, the piece of paper still clutched in my hand. I pushed myself into a corner, my back pressed against the intersection of two walls, trying to keep the entire room in my field of vision. My mind was a mess of screeching tires and broken glass, the hand in the wall, the voice on the phone, the pounding on the door, the drawing. None of it fit together. It was a puzzle made from the pieces of a dozen different nightmares. Then I felt it. A cold draft. It snaked around my ankles, a whisper of air in a room with no open windows. I'd caulked them all myself last winter. The front door was sealed, the deadbolt shot. There should be no draft. My eyes darted to the window, the one Dave and I had looked out of. The crack was still there, but it was just a hairline fracture, not big enough to let in a breeze like this. The air moved again, a chill that felt deliberate, purposeful. It felt like it came from the walls themselves. I was cowering in the corner when my eyes fell on the small, dark wooden box on my bookshelf. It was an old thing my grandfather had given me, where I kept a few odds and ends. Sentimental junk. I hadn't touched it in a year. The lid of the box lifted. It didn't fly open. It didn't pop. It rose slowly, silently, moving with a smoothness that was unnatural. like an invisible hand was lifting it. I stared, my mouth hanging open, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. It opened all the way, stayed suspended for a second, and then a single small photograph fluttered out. It drifted down like a dead leaf, tumbling end over end before landing face down on the dusty shelf. The lid closed again with a soft, final click. I didn't move. I couldn't. Time seemed to stretch and thin. My heart was a hammer pounding against an anvil. I was trapped between the memory of the pounding at the door and the impossible magic trick happening across the room. The note was still in my hand. "I'm in here with you." This was it. This was the one inside. The one that could write, the one that could move things. The one that was trying to tell me something. I had to see the picture. I had to know. Getting to my feet felt like lifting a car. My legs were water. I used the wall to steady myself, my hand flat against the cool drywall. I took one step, then another, my eyes locked on that little rectangle of paper on the bookshelf. The silence in the apartment was huge. It was a physical presence, pressing in on me. I reached the bookshelf, my hand trembling so badly I could barely control it. I pinched the edge of the photograph between my thumb and forefinger. I turned it over. It was an old, faded picture of a young woman, maybe 20 years old, with dark hair tied back and a sad, knowing smile. I didn't recognize her. She must have been a previous tenant, the one before me, the one who left the hand on the wall. I was about to drop it when I saw the writing on the back. It was in faint, spidery penmanship, almost illegible. "Don't trust your eyes. Trust your nose." What the hell did that mean? Trust my nose? My mind was so overloaded the sentence just bounced off. It didn't make sense. It was nonsense. A sick riddle. I looked from the woman's sad eyes to the words on the back, then back again. Trust my nose. I lowered the picture and did what it said. I sniffed the air. Nothing. Just the smell of stale pizza and my own fear sweat. I was losing my mind. This was And then I caught it. Underneath everything else. A faint smell that had been there for so long I'd stopped noticing it. The way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator. It was a damp, earthy smell, like wet soil and rotting leaves. The smell of a cellar. The smell of something old and buried. I had complained about it to the superintendent a month ago. He'd told me it was just the old building's pipes. Now, with the photo in my hand and the impossible events swirling around me, the smell was different. It wasn't just an old building. It was the smell of a grave. I started to follow it. I walked slowly around the living room, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. The smell was faint near the window, almost gone near the kitchen. But as I moved toward the wall that separated the living room from the bedroom, the wall where the painting had been, it grew stronger, much stronger. My eyes scanned the baseboards, looking for a source, a leak, a stain, anything. And then I saw it. The air vent. A simple 10 by 6 inch metal grate near the floor. It was a return air duct for the central system, a system so old it barely worked. It was just a part of the wall. I'd never given it a second thought. I knelt down. The smell was pouring out of it, a thick, musty, foul odor of dirt and decay. It was so strong here it made my eyes water. This was the source. This had always been the source. The woman in the photo, she was trying to tell me, trust your nose, the thing at the door, the thing on the phone, they were distractions. The real danger, the real it, was here, in the walls. My blood ran cold. The note, "I'm in here with you." Was this what it meant? Was it inside the vent? I had to look. The compulsion was absolute. I leaned forward, my face just inches from the metal grate. The air coming out was cold and damp. I pressed my cheek against the floor, trying to angle my eye just right to see through the angled slats. The inside was black, a deep, solid blackness that seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. I could see nothing, just a dark, rectangular tunnel disappearing into the guts of the building. I held my breath, straining to see. And from the deepest part of that impossible blackness, two eyes opened. They weren't eyes. They were stark, white orbs, perfectly round, with no iris, no pupil, just two glowing discs of bone white shining in the absolute dark. They stared right at me. They were not human. They were not animal. They were something else. A scream tore out of my throat, raw and hoarse. I threw myself backward, scrambling away on my hands and feet, my brain short-circuiting. My back slammed into the leg of the coffee table. a jolt of pain shooting up my spine, but I barely felt it. My entire world was those two white eyes in the dark. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't the sound of a dog or a bear. It was a wet, rattling sound like something with a throat full of gravel and mud was trying to roar. The metal grate vibrated with the force of it. This was the thing. The real thing. The hand in the wall. The thing the ghost was afraid of. The note wasn't from the monster. The note was from the victim. The woman in the picture. And she was screaming a warning at me from beyond the grave. I was on my feet, stumbling backward, tripping over my own legs. I couldn't take my eyes off the vent, expecting that thing to burst through the metal at any second. I had to get out. Not just out of the room, out of the building. I didn't care about the thing at the door anymore. Whatever was out there was better than what was in here. My panicked eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, for anything. They landed on the large, ornate mirror hanging in the entryway, the one I used to check my hair before I left. And for a single heart-stopping second, the reflection staring back at me wasn't my own. It wasn't me, wide-eyed and terrified. It was a figure, a tall, gaunt silhouette of a man, its form made of shadow and rot. Its clothes were tattered. Its skin looked like it was sloughing off its bones, dark and wet. It was a thing of pure decay. My reflection, myself, but dead. Dead for a long, long time. My breath hitched. I froze, my body locked in a standoff with my own corrupted image. The dead thing in the mirror slowly, deliberately, lifted a single skeletal hand. Its fingers were long and thin, ending in broken, yellowed nails. It wasn't reaching for me. It didn't look at me. It was pointing. Pointing with a rigid, accusing finger. Not at me. Not at the ceiling. Not at the door. It was pointing directly at the wall with the air vent. The dead thing in the mirror didn't move. It just pointed. Its finger, a bone wrapped in dried leather, was a compass needle locked on true north. The north of my fear. The air vent. The ghost wasn't the enemy. The ghost was the air raid siren. I had to get out. That was the only thought. A single, clean command cutting through the static. Survive until morning. Sunlight. People. Noise. Just make it till then. I would wedge the broken coffee table against the door. Huddle in the furthest corner of the kitchen with the heaviest frying pan I owned. Wait. A plan. It was a stupid plan. It was the only plan. Then the TV screen lit up. It flickered. A burst of black and white snow. A hiss of dead air filled the room. A power surge, I thought. The whole building's wiring was a joke. I ignored it, my eyes still scanning the room, my heart still a frantic drum against my ribs. The screen resolved into a picture. Washed-out colors. Bad 90s video quality. A man with slicked-back hair and a smile full of too many teeth stood in front of a bright, garish logo. My muscles tensed. What now? A message? Another trick from the thing in the walls? The man on screen spread his arms wide. Canned laughter erupted from the TV's speakers. It was a game show. Or a prank show. Some garbage dredged up from the bottom of late-night cable. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It was nothing. Just a random channel. I needed to turn it off. The last thing I needed was more goddamn noise. I scanned the wreckage for the remote, my feet crunching on shattered plastic. No luck. It was probably buried under the guts of the coffee table. I'd have to unplug it from the wall. As I started to move, my eyes caught the set on the TV show. A cheap-looking living room. A floral print armchair. Ugly as sin. A dark hallway visible just over the host's shoulder. I stopped. A cold trickle of recognition slid down my spine. That armchair. I knew that armchair. It was sitting 10 feet away from me, its cushions slashed open. The layout of the room, the placement of the hallway, it was a mirror. A warped, low-budget mirror of my own apartment. My brain stuttered. Coincidence. A set designer had a lazy day. It had to be. The host started talking, his voice dripping with synthetic enthusiasm. And we're back with our terrified contestant who has no idea that every bump in the night, every spooky sound is all part of the game. The camera swiveled from the host. It zoomed in on a man huddled in the corner of the set. The contestant. He looked pale, his eyes wide. He was younger, his hair shorter, but I knew that face. I knew the way his jaw clenched when he was scared. It was Dave. My blood turned to ice. My legs felt weak. That's not possible. I just called him. I just talked to him. This had to be old. Years old. He did a stupid prank show and never told me. That had to be the answer. A sick, unbelievable coincidence. But the knot in my stomach tightened. The pieces weren't fitting. They were grinding against each other, screaming that something was wrong. Why this show? Why now? Better. The host on the screen leaned into the camera, his smile widening. The old footage of Dave vanished, replaced by the host's face, crisp and high definition. The canned laughter stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, deliberate. He wasn't looking at a studio audience anymore. He was looking at me. "Hello, Leo," he said. His voice, clear and direct from the speakers, cut through the air. "And welcome to the live season finale of Ultimate Panic." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My name. He said my name. This wasn't a recording. This wasn't a coincidence. "You've been a fantastic contestant," the host continued, his tone conversational, as if we were chatting over coffee. "Truly, the terror, the desperation, A-plus material. You really believed it, didn't you?" My mind reeled, a nauseating lurch of comprehension, the pounding on the door, the frantic calls from the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, the calm, reassuring voice of Officer Riley on the 911 call. "Let's give a round of applause for our amazing cast," the host beamed. A picture of the sweet old woman from next door flashed on the screen, followed by a headshot of a stern-looking man, the cop. "And of course, your rock, your lifeline, your best friend, Dave, who played his part beautifully, didn't he? Feeding you just enough concern to make it all feel real." The hand. The note slipped under the door. The ghost story. It was all fake. A production. A series of carefully orchestrated stunts designed to push me to the edge. The horror wasn't a monster. The horror was that my terror was a performance. My desperate fight for survival was entertainment. This apartment wasn't my home. It was a soundstage. The walls weren't just walls. They were the edges of a cage built for the amusement of others. I looked at my hands, shaking. I thought about my ragged breathing, the panicked whimpers I'd tried to stifle. They had recorded it all. They had watched it all. The violation was so complete, so absolute, it was like my skin had been peeled off. The fear of death was gone, replaced by a white-hot wave of pure, undiluted rage. It wasn't a monster in the vent. It was a special effects rig. It wasn't a ghost in the mirror. It was some kind of projection. It was all a lie. A sick, twisted, elaborate lie. Click. The sound of the deadbolt on my front door turning. It didn't break. It wasn't forced. It was unlocked. With a key. The door swung inward. Bright, clinical light flooded the dark entryway. Silhouetted against it stood a figure, then another behind him holding a large camera. The first figure stepped into the light. It was Dave. His face was split in a wide, triumphant grin. "Leo! Surprise, man!" he shouted, his arms spread wide. "We got you! You're on TV!" The camera operator behind him moved forward, the red recording light a malevolent eye. A sound guy followed, a long boom mic hovering just over Dave's head, pointing at me like an accusing finger. The canned laughter from the TV roared back to life, a chorus of mocking strangers. They saw me, standing in the debris, filthy, sweat-soaked, wild-eyed, a cornered animal. And they were smiling. The string inside me snapped. The terror, the adrenaline, the betrayal, it all curdled into a single explosive point. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I acted. A scream tore from my throat, a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of something breaking. I launched myself across the room. I hit Dave like a freight train. We went down in a tangle of limbs, my shoulder slamming into his chest. His surprised grunt was lost under my roar. We crashed into a small table by the door, sending a lamp and a stack of mail flying. The camera operator scrambled back, trying to keep the shot in focus. I heard people shouting, "Whoa! Whoa, Leo! Calm down!" My hands found his throat. I wasn't trying to kill him. I was just squeezing, pouring all the engineered fear, all the calculated humiliation into my grip. His eyes were wide with shock, not fear. He still thought this was part of the show. As we struggled on the floor, my head was twisted to the side. Over Dave's shoulder, my gaze fell upon the far wall. The wall with the air vent. The show's crew was in my apartment. The lights were on. The game was over. It was all explained. But the smell was still there. It wasn't a scent machine. It was stronger now, cutting through the sudden sterility of the room. A thick, wet odor of turned earth and deep decay. It poured from the vent, a foul tide that no camera could capture and no audience could smell. It was real. It had always been real. And then, as my fingers tightened on Dave's neck, a voice whispered. It wasn't from the TV. It wasn't from the crew. It was a thought that bloomed in the center of my skull, cold and brittle and ancient. A voice that didn't belong to me. They don't know I'm real. My grip went slack. My body froze. I stared past Dave's panicked face, past the camera lens, at the small, black rectangle in the wall. The game was a lie. The ghost was real. And we had just put on a very loud, very bright show right on top of its grave. Two guys in black shirts grabbed my arms. They were strong. Their hands were like clamps. They hauled me off Dave, my feet scraping against the floor. The rage was still afire in my throat, but my body was spent. Whoa! Easy, man! Easy! Dave scrambled to his feet, dusting himself off. He was still smiling, that wide, fake TV smile. It was the most punchable thing I had ever seen. Jesus, Leo. We got you good, huh? The crew laughed. A real, live laugh track. Not from the television, but from the half-dozen strangers standing in my ruined living room. They saw a prank victim. The climax of their sick show. The host, the one from the TV, a man with a plastic face and shark's eyes, clapped his hands together. Magnificent! That's the real stuff, folks. Pure, uncut terror. Let's get some B-roll of his face. The cameraman swung the lens toward me. The red light was an insult, a violation. I tried to scream at them, to tell them what they were, but the word caught in my throat. It wasn't rage that stopped it. It was a tickle, a sharp, dry itch deep in my lungs. I coughed. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a hard, hacking sound that tore up from my chest. It bent me over, even in the grip of the two crewmen. My ribs ached. Dave's grin faltered a little. Dude, you okay? Breathe, man. It's over. I tried to tell him to go to hell. I tried to breathe. But another cough ripped through me, and another. Each one was like getting hit in the chest with a rock. My vision swam. The bright production lights blurred into ugly starbursts. Get him some water, the host said, his voice laced with annoyance. The show was over. The animal was supposed to be docile now. The laughter had stopped. The room was just the sound of my lungs trying to tear themselves apart and the shuffling of feet on the floor. The two guys holding me loosened their grip, unsure. Hey, a voice said. It was quiet. It cut through my coughing fit. Look at the wall. It was a man with headphones around his neck, the sound guy. He wasn't looking at me. He was pointing the long pole of his microphone, not at my face, but at the far wall. The wall with the air vent. Every head in the room turned, mine included. Something was wrong. The white paint around the vent wasn't white anymore. It was a dark, bruised, purple-gray. A damp stain. But it was more than that. It was moving. We all saw it. Faint, thread-like black lines were branching out from the edges of the stain, creeping across the plaster. They moved with a slow, deliberate crawl, like veins of black ink spreading on a wet napkin. You could actually see them getting longer, millimeter by millimeter. The smell hit everyone at once. Before, it was my private horror. Now it filled the room, thick and unavoidable. The sweet, sick smell of a forest floor dug up after a flood. The smell of decay. What the hell is that? Someone whispered. Is that a special effect? the cameraman asked, his voice nervous. He panned his camera over, zooming in on the creeping black tendrils. "Nobody told me about a mold gag." The host stared, his plastic smile finally gone. "It's not us," he said flatly. More people started coughing. Soft, polite coughs at first, then harder ones, mirroring my own. The air was getting thick. Heavy. The bright camera light above us flickered. Once. Twice. Then it went out, plunging the room into the dim glow of the entryway lights. A woman screamed. The light buzzed and flickered back on, a sickly buzzing hum now accompanying it. The strobing effect made the growing mold on the wall seem to jitter and dance. It was chaos. People were bumping into each other, stumbling over cables. The fun was over. The set was no longer safe. Dave took a step toward me. His face was white. He'd forgotten about the prank. He'd forgotten about the cameras. He was just a guy in a room where something was going very, very wrong. "Leo," he said, his voice a strained croak. Your eyes?" "What? My eyes?" I tried to focus on him, but my own vision felt blurry, warped. The camera, the big production camera, was just a few feet away, its lens a black, soulless eye. I shook off the hands of the crewmen. They barely resisted and stumbled forward. I shoved the stunned cameraman out of the way and leaned in close, staring at my own reflection in the dark, curved glass of the lens. The person staring back wasn't me. The whites of my eyes were gone. In their place was a jaundiced, ugly yellow, like old parchment. They looked sick. They looked like the eyes of something that was already dead. And from my right nostril, a single, thick, black drop of fluid was beginning to well up. I raised a shaking hand to my face. My fingers brushed against the drop. It wasn't blood. It was cool, oily. I pulled my fingers away and stared at the black smear on my skin. My mind couldn't process it. It was like a scene from a body horror movie, but the special effect was real and it was happening to me. Behind me, the sound guy gagged, a wet, choking sound, and collapsed to his knees. Crack! The sound came from the wall. A wet, splintering sound, like waterlogged wood snapping under pressure. The dark stain wasn't a stain anymore. It was a bulge. The plaster was swelling outward, pregnant with whatever rot was growing inside. More cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, black liquid weeping from the fissures. "Get out!" The host shrieked, his voice raw with real fear. "Everyone get the hell out now!" The order was useless. The doorway was a bottleneck of panicked bodies. A tangled mess of flailing limbs and terrified shouts. They were trapped. We were all trapped. The wall groaned. The bulging section of plaster, now 3 feet wide, looked like a monstrous blister. Then, with a sound like wet cardboard tearing, it didn't explode. It sloughed. It peeled away from the studs and fell to the floor in a single, damp slab, exposing the dark cavity within. Silence. A moment of frozen, collective horror. There was no monster, no creature with claws and teeth. There was only it. A mass, a titanic, glistening, black growth that filled the space between the wall studs. It was a solid block of mold, but it was alive. It had texture. Pulsating lobes like misshapen organs. Darker vein-like structures running through it, throbbing with a slow, sick rhythm. It glistened under the flickering camera light, wet and fecund. It looked like a giant, cancerous lung breathing inside the walls of my apartment. As we all stared, paralyzed, a shudder ran through the pulsing mass. A deep, wet contraction. And then it exhaled. A dense cloud of fine, black powder billowed out from the hole in the wall. Not smoke. Spores. A thick, rolling fog of them. It poured into the room, silent and deadly. The screaming started again. It was different this time. Not the cinematic scream of a prank. It was the desperate, animal screaming of people who knew they were breathing in their own death. They clawed at their throats, their faces. They choked and fell, tripping over one another in the mad scramble for an exit that wasn't there. The air filled with the dust. It smelled like a freshly opened grave, but in the thick of the black fog I saw something else. through the swirling chaos of the spores. My eyes, my yellowed, dying eyes, found a shape. It was her, the ghost girl from the mirror. She was standing where the wall had been, right in front of the pulsating mold. She was translucent, a thing of shadow and bad memories. And the spores were unmaking her. The black dust swirled around her, through her. Her form flickered and dissolved, the edges of her phantom body frayed like old cloth. The ghost wasn't the source. It was a symptom. A psychic stain left behind by the real monster. A hallucination. An echo of the last victim, burned into the very fabric of the fungus. She was dying a second time. The terror in my chest was gone, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. I wasn't looking at a ghost. I was looking at a memory. Amidst the screams and the choking of the crew, as Dave crawled on the floor, his face a mask of horror, I just watched her. Her form grew fainter, almost gone. Before she vanished completely, she turned her head. She looked right at me. The pointing finger, the silent accusation. It was all gone. For the first time, her face was not a mask of rage or fear. It was calm. And then she smiled, a small, sad, peaceful smile, a look of release, of thanks. Then she dissolved into the black cloud and was gone. My knees gave out. I hit the floor, the impact jarring my teeth. The last thing I saw before my vision tunneled to black was Dave, looking at me, his mouth open in a silent scream, his own eyes beginning to turn a sickly, familiar shade of yellow. The ghost story was a lie. The game show was a lie. The only truth was the biological fact of the thing in the wall. She had been chapter 1. We were the epilogue. The smell was the first thing. Not mold, not damp earth and decay. Antiseptic. Sharp, clean, and wrong. My eyes cracked open. The world was a painful white ceiling tiles, white walls. The sheets pulled up to my chin were stiff and white. A machine beside me made a soft, steady beeping sound, a slow, even rhythm. A liar. My heart wasn't slow or even. It was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I was lying down. My arm had a tube in it. The clear liquid dripped in, one drop at a time. Safe. The thought was a whisper in the back of my skull. It's over. I'm safe. In a hospital. They got us out. I tried to sit up. A wave of dizziness pushed me back down into the pillow. My head throbbed. I let my eyes close again, just for a second. The white room dissolved. I saw the black cloud. I saw the wall slough away like wet skin. I saw Dave's face, his mouth open, his eyes turning yellow. My own eyes shot open. The white room snapped back into place. It was a memory. It had to be. A nightmare brought on by the mold. That was all. It was over. I was alive. I was in a hospital. That was real. The rest was the past. A man in a white coat walked in. He had a clipboard and a kind, tired face. He wasn't the shark-eyed host. He wasn't one of the crew. He was a doctor. Real. "Leo, good to see you awake," he said, his voice calm. He checked the IV drip, then looked at my chart. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to talk. My throat was sandpaper. A dry croak came out. He noticed and poured me a glass of water from a plastic pitcher. I drank it all. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. "Better?" he asked. I nodded. The others. I managed, my voice a rasp. "The film crew. Are they okay?" The doctor looked at me, not with pity, not with concern, just a blank sort of confusion, like I'd asked him a question in a language he didn't speak. "Film crew?" he repeated slowly. The steady beep of the machine next to me seemed to get louder. "Yeah, the crew from the show. Total panic. Dave, my friend, the host, the cameraman." The names felt stupid on my tongue. The memory of the chaos suddenly felt flimsy, like a movie I half remembered. The doctor pulled a small stool over and sat down. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. His expression was professional. It was the kind of look someone gives you before they tell you something you don't want to hear. "Leo," he started, his voice gentle. "We found you in your apartment, alone. A neighbor reported a foul smell and called the building manager. You'd been unconscious on the floor for almost 3 days. No." The word was a silent scream in my head. No, that's not right, I said. My voice shook. There was a whole crew. It was a prank show. They were there. They saw it. The mold. The wall. I pointed at nothing, my hand trembling in the air. The spores. A girl. Leo, listen to me, the doctor said, his voice firm but not unkind. The hazmat team went into your apartment. The place was infested with a toxic mold, Stachybotrys chartarum. It's known to cause severe respiratory issues, hemorrhaging, and intense neurological symptoms. Hallucinations are very common. Violent, vivid hallucinations. He paused, letting the words sink in. They didn't sink. They floated on the surface of my mind, huge and black and refusing to make sense. Everything you saw, the doctor said, looking me right in the eye. The people, the show, all of it. It was a fiction your brain created to try and make sense of the poisoning. A defense mechanism. The beeping of the machine was faster now. My heart, it knew. No, I whispered. It was the only word I had left. My friend, Dave. He brought them there. He set it up. The doctor's face softened a little. We found your wallet, your phone. We contacted your emergency contact. A David Chen? Yes, Dave. See? A spark of hope. A desperate, stupid spark. He's on his way, the doctor continued. He was very worried. Said he hadn't heard from you in days. He was in San Diego for a work conference all week. The spark went out. It left nothing but cold ash. The white walls of the room seemed closer now. The air, thinner. So the game show, the host, the cameras filming my terror, all of it was a lie. A story I told myself while I was dying on my living room floor. But it was a good lie. It was a lie with a villain. It was a lie with an explanation. A sick, twisted prank, but an explanation nonetheless. The reality was so much worse. There was no prank. There was no Dave betraying me. There was no crew to witness it. There was only me, alone in my apartment. The television babbling to an empty room, while the walls breathed death. My isolation wasn't just a weakness that made the horror possible. It was the horror. There was no one else. There had never been anyone else. The worst thing that I could imagine, a televised humiliation, was just a fantasy my mind invented to protect me from the truth. The truth was that I was just a guy who went mad and collapsed by himself. No audience, no climax, just a footnote in a building manager's logbook. The doctor must have seen the look on my face. You need to rest, Leo. Your body has been through a major trauma. Your mind, too. We'll talk more later. He stood up and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. I was alone again. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold against the soles of my feet. I stood up, using the IV stand for balance. My reflection in the dark TV screen across the room was a pale, distorted ghost. I ignored it. I needed a mirror. I needed to see my own face. The bathroom was small and sterile. One door. No windows. I gripped the edges of the sink, my knuckles white. I looked up. It was my face. Thinner. Paler. My skin had a yellow tint to it. The whites of my eyes, too. Jaundice, the doctor had called it. Liver damage from the toxins. I looked sick. I looked like a stranger. My mind replayed the image of myself in the camera lens. The yellow eyes. The black fluid from my nose. Was that real? Or just another scene from my private movie? What was real? The mold. The sickness. The loneliness. That was all. The monster wasn't a ghost girl. The monster wasn't a sadistic TV producer. The monster was a fungus. I could accept that. It was science. It was biology. It could be treated. It could be cleaned. It could be over. My reflection stared back at me, unblinking. I stared into my own yellow eyes, looking for some flicker of myself. For Leo. Then my reflection smiled. It wasn't my smile. It never had been. It was a wide, hideous cartoon grin. It stretched my lips too far, pulling the pale skin tight across my cheekbones. A dead smile on a sick face. It was the kind of smile a child would draw on a puppet with a thick, black magic marker. A joke. The most terrible joke in the world. My own face. My real face. It wasn't smiling. It was frozen. I could feel my lips pressed together in a thin, hard line. I could feel the terror locking my jaw in place. But in the mirror, the smile stayed. Wide. Wet. Knowing. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, wild drumbeat now. The beep, beep, beeping from the other room was a frantic alarm. The thing in the mirror. The thing wearing my face. It was still smiling, that marker pen smile. It knew. It had been there all along. It wasn't in the walls. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a TV crew. It was a passenger. It was in my head. And it was still there. The poison was just the key that unlocked its cage. I slammed my eyes shut. I couldn't look. I couldn't see it anymore. I pressed my palms against my eyelids, trying to force the image out. Blackness. Just give me blackness. In the dark. In the quiet of my own mind. A voice spoke. It was smooth. It was confident. It was the voice of the game show host. The one who was never there. It was as clear and real as if he were standing next to me, his breath on my ear. "Welcome back," the voice said, full of cheerful energy. "The show's not over yet." The therapy room smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and muted desperation. White walls. 2 comfortable-looking chairs. 1 box of tissues, strategically placed. Dr. Aris watched me, her face a professional mask of calm concern. She was paid to listen to the crazy. I was paid up on my insurance. A fair trade. "So, the voice?" she said, her pen tapping a soft rhythm against her notepad. "Have you heard it again since that first night?" "No," I said. A clean, simple lie. Nothing. The dreams are better too. Just normal stuff now. Work, traffic. I had to sell this. I had to be normal. Normal people get to leave. Normal people get to go home. Except I didn't have a home anymore. Just a contaminated box sealed with biohazard tape. "I think the doctor was right," I continued, leaning forward, trying to look earnestly engaged. "It was the mold. A massive chemical exposure. My brain cooked up a whole movie to protect itself. Now that the toxins are flushing out, the movie's over. It sounded good. It sounded reasonable. I almost believed it myself. The host's voice had been quiet. The smiling man in the mirror had not returned. Maybe it really was over. Maybe the fever had broken. "That's excellent progress, Leo," Dr. Aris said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's talk about the hallucinations themselves. The game show. Why do you think your mind created that specific scenario?" I shrugged. My hands felt clammy. I reached for the glass of water on the small table between us. "I don't know. Maybe guilt? My friend Dave, he was always trying to get me out of the apartment. I kept blowing him off. Maybe my brain invented a story where he was the bad guy, to make me feel better about being so isolated." My hand shook. The glass trembled. A tiny earthquake in my grip. Water sloshed over the rim, onto my knuckles, onto the floor. "Shit. Sorry." I bent down with a paper towel from the ever-present box. I went to wipe up the spill. It was a small puddle on the light gray linoleum. But it wasn't clear. For one stretched-out second, the water on the floor was black. Not dirty. Not shadowy. It was a patch of absolute, light-eating black. A hole in the world the size of my palm. I froze, my hand hovering over it. And then it was just water. Clear. Reflecting the overhead fluorescent lights. I blinked. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. "Leo? Are you all right?" I looked up at Dr. Aris. My face felt numb. Yeah, fine. Just, my eyes are still a little weird from the jaundice. The lights in here are bright." I wiped up the water. The paper towel came away damp, not black. I balled it up in my fist, my knuckles white. An afterimage, a trick of the light. A side effect of the medicine they pumped into me. It had to be. That night, the hospital was quiet. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic beep of my own heart monitor, and the distant squeak of a nurse's shoes down the hall. I was trying to read a magazine, but the words kept blurring. The glossy photo of a smiling celebrity looked like a mask. A young nurse came in. She was new, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a practiced, gentle efficiency. She didn't speak, just checked the IV drip, wrote something on my chart, and took my blood pressure. The cuff squeezed my arm, a familiar, impersonal pressure. "Everything looks good," she murmured, turning to leave. "Try to get some rest." As she turned her back, I saw it. On the crisp, white fabric of her collar, right below her hairline, a tiny black spot. I leaned forward, squinting. It wasn't a speck of lint, it was a miniature, branching shape. Like a black star, like a microscopic snapshot of the mold that had consumed my apartment wall. My breath caught in my throat. "Wait," I called out, my voice louder than I intended. She stopped at the door, turning back. "Yes?" I stared at her collar. It was perfectly white, clean. There was nothing there. My mind raced. I saw it. I know I saw it. Have you ever been to my old apartment building?" "For work? A house call?" She gave me a confused look. The kind you give a patient you already suspect is unstable. No, I just work this floor." "Why?" "No reason," I said, sinking back into the pillows. "Sorry, long day." She nodded slowly and left, closing the door behind her. The click of the latch was like a starting pistol. It wasn't a trick of the light this time. It wasn't my eyes. It had been on her. How? Was I giving it off? Was I a carrier? Spores on my clothes, on my skin? Was I contagious? The thought was colder than any hallucination. A monster in my head was one thing. A plague I could spread was another. I couldn't sleep. The question burned behind my eyes. Was I the only one? The hospital was a tomb after 2 a.m., a skeleton crew of nurses at the main station, their faces lit by the blue glow of computer monitors. I watched them for 20 minutes from the crack in my doorway. I saw one of them get up and head down the hall for her break. The other was engrossed in whatever she was watching on her phone. Now or never. I slipped out of my room, my bare feet cold on the polished floor. I wore the hospital gown and flimsy robe. I felt like a ghost. Every sound was a cannon shot, the whisper of my slippers, the hum of an ice machine, the frantic drumming of my own pulse. The nurse's station was a small island of light in the dim hallway. One chair was empty. On the desk, next to a half-eaten bag of chips, lay a key card attached to a lanyard. I didn't think. I just moved. One smooth, silent motion. I snatched the card, my fingers closing around the cool plastic. I didn't look back. I went straight for the door at the end of the counter, the one marked Records. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely slide the card. The light on the lock blinked green. A soft thunk. I was in. The room smelled of old paper and ozone from a humming server rack. Rows of metal shelves were filled with manila folders. A single computer terminal sat on a desk in the corner. I went to it, the stolen keycard clutched in my fist. The screensaver was a picture of a golden retriever. I clicked the mouse. The patient database popped up. A search bar blinked expectantly. My fingers flew over the keyboard. I didn't type my name. I typed my address. 1411 Northwood Avenue. Enter. The screen flickered. A list of names appeared. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just my name. There were 5 others. No. 10. 20. The scroll bar on the side of the screen was tiny. There had to be 50 names. All with admission dates in the last 2 weeks. All from my building. My blood ran cold. I clicked the first name. A woman from 3B. Maria Flores. Diagnosis, acute psychotic break. Sudden onset schizophrenia. Notes. Patient was found by family barricaded in her apartment. Claimed her television was speaking to her directly, telling her to, quote, prepare for the final round. Reported seeing a smiling man in the reflections of her silverware. I started shaking. Hard. I clicked the next name, a man from 7A, Robert Parrish. Diagnosis, delusional parasitosis. Severe hallucinatory episode. Notes. Patient repeatedly called 911, claiming something was living in the walls of his apartment. described hearing the voice of a game show host narrating his actions. Was found attempting to tear down his own drywall with a hammer. The next file. A college kid from 2C. Diagnosis: toxin-induced psychosis. Notes: found unconscious. Upon waking, described an elaborate shared hallucination involving a hidden camera TV show called Total Panic. Patient obsessed with the idea that his best friend had betrayed him. It was all there. All of it. The same story. The same characters. The same script. A TV host who was never there. A smiling man in the mirror. Technology turning against them. It wasn't my private movie. It was a syndicated program, broadcast directly into the brains of my neighbors. The mold wasn't just a poison that caused random hallucinations. It was a network. It was a signal. It delivered the same nightmare to everyone it touched. I gripped the sides of the monitor. The truth hit me, not like a wave, but like a building falling on me. I thought I was fighting a monster in my head, a single personal demon. I had survived it. I had beaten it. But I wasn't the hero of the story. I was just a single survivor of the first wave. The twist wasn't that the monster was real. The twist was that there wasn't just one. There was an army of them. One for every infected person. An army of demons wearing the faces of my neighbors, living inside their skulls, playing the same sick game over and over. I didn't defeat the enemy. I just escaped my own personal battlefield. The war was still raging, and I was the only one who knew. My breath came in ragged gasps. The room felt like it was shrinking, the shelves of paper closing in. I had to get out. I stumbled back out of the records room, leaving the keycard on the desk. The remaining nurse didn't even look up from her phone. I didn't go back to bed. I went to the window at the end of the hall, the one that looked out over the city. The view was a sprawling universe of lights under a starless sky. Millions of windows. Millions of lives. For a moment, it was calming. Then my eyes adjusted. I saw the residential tower across the street, a near twin to the hospital building. Just another block of stacked apartments. A light was on in a window on the 5th floor. I could see a silhouette inside, a human shape against the yellow light. The figure was moving. It wasn't pacing. It was a jerky, frantic motion. It was scratching, clawing at the wall, again and again, with a desperate, rhythmic energy I knew in my bones. My gaze drifted down to a window on the 3rd floor. A man was standing there, staring out. But he was talking, his head nodding, his hands gesturing to someone who wasn't there. My eyes jumped to another window. Another shadow, this one just walking in tight, endless circles. Another. Another. The city was not asleep. It was dreaming my nightmare. This wasn't an outbreak confined to one contaminated building. How far had it spread? How many spores had traveled on the wind, on the clothes of visitors, on the tires of delivery trucks? Not 'cause I wasn't the sole victim. I wasn't special. I was just the first one to wake up inside the asylum. They said it was for my own good. Dr. Eris's face was a mask of placid professionalism. The male nurse on my right was built like a refrigerator. The needle was small, but it felt like a railroad spike. "This will help you rest, Leo," Eris said. Her voice was too calm. It was the voice you use on a stray dog you're about to trap. I tried again. My words came out in a rush, a jumble of terror and truth. "The records. Did you look at the records? It's not just me. It's the whole building. Northwood Avenue. Flores. Parrish, the kid from 2C. We all have it. The same dream. The same show." Dr. Eris exchanged a look with the nurse. It was a tiny, fractional glance, but it said everything. "He's gone. The mold creates a network, a signal," I begged, my eyes darting between them. "It broadcasts the nightmare. The smiling man, the game show host. It's not a symptom. It's the disease itself. I saw it. I saw people in other buildings clawing at the walls. That's enough, Leo." Her voice was firm now. The refrigerator moved closer. I felt the cold prick of the alcohol swab on my bicep. "No, wait, please." The needle went in. I flinched, but it was the calm that scared me. They were so sure of themselves. So sure I was the one who was broken. I watched the plunger go down, the clear liquid vanishing into my arm. The nurse patted my shoulder. There we go. Get some sleep." They left. The door clicked shut. I lay back on the pillows, my heart hammering against my ribs. A chemical warmth began to spread through my veins, a lazy, syrupy tide. My eyelids felt heavy. My thoughts started to blur at the edges. This is how they win, I thought. They drug you until you believe their version of the world. But there was a pill, a tiny white disc they'd given me an hour earlier. "For the anxiety," the first nurse had said with a plastic smile. I hadn't swallowed it. It was still there, tucked between my gum and cheek, a bitter, chalky secret. As their sedative tried to pull me under, I worked the little pill out with my tongue, spat it into my palm, and hid it under the rim of my mattress. A tiny act of rebellion. A seed of a plan. I pretended to fall asleep, letting my breathing go slack, letting the hum of the hospital lull them into a false sense of security. I had to get out. I had to get back to the building. I needed proof, something physical, something they couldn't dismiss as a psychosomatic fever dream. I waited. 1 hour. 2. The sedative was strong, but my terror was stronger. It was a shot of pure adrenaline, fighting the drug every inch of the way. Around 3 a.m., the hallway fell into its deepest quiet. I pushed the blankets off. My feet touched the cold floor. The hospital gown felt flimsy, pathetic. I cracked the door open. A sliver of dim, yellow light cut across my room. The hallway was empty except for a lone figure at the far end, near the exit sign. A wheelchair, its back to me. The figure in it was small, hunched. I started to creep out, my body a coiled spring of tension. Each step was a silent prayer. "Leo?" The voice was a dry whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. I froze. The figure in the wheelchair hadn't moved. It was a woman. An old woman. Thin gray hair and a messy bun. My blood turned to ice. It was Mrs. Gable, from 4B. The woman whose cat I used to feed when she went to visit her sister. I'd seen her name on the list in the records room. Diagnosis: catatonic state. She slowly turned her head. It was a stiff, unnatural movement, like a doll's. Her eyes found mine in the gloom. They weren't blank. They weren't catatonic. They were wide and aware and filled with a horror so profound it stole the air from my lungs. Her dry lips parted. A single word, a rustle of sound filled with a meaning I couldn't grasp. "Home," she whispered. Then again, a little stronger. "Go home, son." Her head snapped back to face forward. She was gone again. Just a vacant shell in a wheelchair. My plan to gather evidence dissolved. The new plan was simpler. Run. I didn't go for the main elevators. Too much risk. I went for the stairwell at the opposite end of the hall. The door had a small wired glass window. I peered through it. Empty. I pushed the bar. The heavy door hissed open and slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the concrete shaft. My bare feet slapped against the gritty steps as I descended. 2 floors down, a door creaked open above me. Footsteps. Light. Quick. A nurse. I ducked into the landing of the next floor down, pressing myself into the shadows. I held my breath. The footsteps came down, past my level, and kept going. I let out a slow, shaky breath. I pushed the door open to the new floor. Maybe I could find a different exit. A service elevator. Anything. The hallway was identical to mine, but it felt wrong. It was darker. The air was colder. At the far end, a patient stood, staring at a blank wall, his hands pressed flat against the drywall. He was whispering. As I got closer, I heard what he was saying. "Bonus round," he mumbled. "Gotta find the key for the bonus round. He said it's in here. The host said so." It was the man from 7A Robert Parrish. His eyes were wide, but they didn't see me. They were milky white, like someone had poured skim milk over his pupils. They looked like old, dead television screens. I backed away, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I turned, and a nurse was right there. I jumped back, my heart seizing in my chest. She didn't react. She just smiled, a wide, empty smile. "Feeling better, sweetie?" she asked. The voice. It wasn't hers. It was my mother's voice, the exact lilting tone she used when I was a kid with a fever. My real mother was 1,000 miles away. What came out of this woman's smiling mouth was a perfect, chilling echo. "Mom?" The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. The nurse's smile widened. "You need to rest. Let's get you back to your room. It's not safe out here." This wasn't the hospital anymore. This was the hallucination. This was the game. It had followed me. Or it was never confined to my apartment in the first place. This entire building was just a bigger, cleaner version of the same trap. The asylum was everywhere. I shoved past her. I didn't wait for her to react. I ran. Her voice followed me down the hall, my mother's voice turning sharp, angry. "Don't you walk away from me, young man! You get back here right now!" I hit the stairwell door and scrambled down, not 2 floors this time, but 5, 6, 7, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I burst out onto the ground floor lobby. It was dark, deserted. The glass sliding doors leading to the street were 30 feet away. Freedom! I ran for them, and then someone stepped out from behind a large potted plant, blocking my path. It was me, not a reflection, a person, standing right there. He looked healthy, calm. He was wearing my clothes, the jeans and gray t-shirt I'd been admitted in. His face was relaxed, a little concerned. He looked rested, sane. "Leo, stop," he said. His voice was my voice, but clear and steady. "No panic, no fear. This is crazy. You're having an episode." I stopped, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stared at him. The perfect copy. He took a step closer. "Think about it," he said, his tone gentle, reasonable. "A fungus that creates a shared hallucination? A game show broadcast? Does that sound real to you? Or does it sound like something a very sick mind would invent to make sense of a chemical poisoning?" His words were sharp. They were my own doubts, my own desperate hopes, given form and voice. "You're not real," I whispered. He smiled sadly. "I'm the realest thing here. I'm the part of you that isn't sick, the part that knows you need to be here, in the hospital, where they can help you." He gestured back toward the elevators. "Just come back upstairs. Go to sleep. When you wake up, a lot of this will be over. But if you walk out that door..." He shook his head. "Out there? That's where the madness is. In here, it's safe." He was so convincing, so calm. For a split second, I almost believed him. The warmth of the sedative still lingered in my blood. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all a break. Maybe the only monster was the malfunctioning chemistry in my own skull. He held out a hand. "Come on, let's go back." I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the glass doors behind him. "Home," Mrs. Gable had whispered. He was the host. He was the smiling man. He was the mold. A different shape, a different tactic, but the same enemy. He was trying to talk me into my own prison cell. I didn't say a word. I lunged forward and threw a punch. My fist didn't connect with flesh and bone. It passed through him like he was made of cold smoke. A jolt, not of impact, but of pure wrongness, shot up my arm. The image of myself flickered like a bad TV signal, his calm face contorting into a silent scream. Then he was gone. I didn't stop. I ran the last 10 feet and slammed my hands against the button for the automatic doors. Nothing happened. The light was off. The doors were locked for the night. Trapped, my eyes darted around. A fire alarm pull station on the wall. A red box with a white handle. I didn't think. I smashed the glass with my elbow. The pain, a distant, unimportant fact. I pulled the handle down. The world exploded in sound. A skull-splitting alarm blared through the lobby. Red lights flashed, painting the empty space in beats of blood. A loud thunk came from the sliding doors as the magnetic locks disengaged. They slid open. I stumbled out into the night. The rain was cold, a clean shock against my feverish skin. The city air tasted of asphalt and freedom. The alarm from the hospital was a dull roar behind me. I was out. I was free. I stood there on the wet sidewalk, gasping, my whole body shaking, half from cold, half from adrenaline. I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were bloody from punching the illusion. My elbow screamed from smashing the alarm case. The pain was real. It was beautiful. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. A cough rattled my chest. A deep, wet, hacking sound. I coughed again, harder this time. Something came up. I spit into my palm. It wasn't phlegm. It wasn't blood. It was a single black speck, no bigger than a pinhead. It sat in the center of my palm, stark against my skin in the orange glow of the streetlights. As I watched, horrified, it pulsed. A tiny, rhythmic throb. It was alive. I ran. The hospital gown slapped against my wet legs. The cold rain was a good kind of pain. A real pain. Not like the smoke and mirrors phantom I'd punched in the lobby. My feet, bare and bloody, pounded the pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew it had to be away. Away from the clean rooms and the calm voices, and the needles that promised rest but delivered a deeper nightmare. My lungs burned. Every breath was a fresh fire. The cough came again, a deep, rattling thing that tore its way up from my chest. I doubled over next to a bus stop shelter, spitting onto the dark asphalt. In the yellow glare of a street lamp, I saw it again. Another black speck, then another. They looked like tiny, wet seeds. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and tasted metal. "Home," Mrs. Gable had whispered. "Go home, son." The word was an anchor. It was a command. My apartment building, Northwood Avenue. The source of the sickness. The place with the proof. My brain, still buzzing with a cocktail of terror and the dregs of the sedative, latched onto the idea. It was the only plan I had. I started moving again, a shambling, shivering wreck in a city that didn't notice or care. I got lucky. A late-night bus hissed to a stop a block ahead. The driver gave me a long look, taking in the hospital gown and bare feet, but the pile of wet bills I'd grabbed from my wallet in the hospital admissions bag was enough to make him shrug and look away. I huddled in the back, soaking wet, shivering, trying not to look at the other passengers. Every shadow in the corner of my eye was the nurse with my mother's voice. Every reflection in the dark window was my own calm, smiling doppelganger. The bus let me off 3 blocks from my building. I knew it was close before I saw it. The air changed. It smelled clean. Too clean, a chemical, antiseptic smell that scraped the inside of my nose. Then I saw the lights. Not police lights. These were different, steady, white and yellow. They lit up the entire block in a harsh, clinical glare. My building, my home, was gone. In its place was a quarantine zone. The whole 4-story brick structure was shrink-wrapped. Huge sheets of thick, semi-transparent plastic were draped over it, sealed with wide yellow tape. Hoses snaked out from the ground floor windows, connected to humming generators and large metal tanks on the back of unmarked trucks. A command tent was set up across the street, glowing from within, and everywhere there were figures in white, hazmat suits, full-face respirators. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, like astronauts on an alien world. My world. For a second, a wave of something washed over me. Vindication. It was bitter and cold and didn't feel like a victory at all. I was right. I wasn't crazy. The monster was real. But seeing the scale of the response, the sheer biohazard level effort to contain it, the validation was just another flavor of terror. I stumbled forward, out of the shadows and into the light. One of the white figures near the tent turned, the faceplate of its mask catching the glare. It raised a hand, a gesture to stop. "Sir, this is a restricted area. You can't be here." The voice was muffled, distorted by the respirator. I just stood there, swaying on my feet. I was too tired to run anymore. Another figure came out of the tent. This one was holding a tablet. He stopped and looked at me, then down at his screen, then back at me. He walked toward me, his boots crunching on the wet gravel. "Hold on," he said to the first guard. He stopped a few feet away from me. "Your name, is it Leo Collins?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He let out a short, sharp breath that fogged the inside of his mask. "Jesus Christ, we've been looking for you. The hospital." He looked me up and down. "You're him, apartment 5C. We found your journals, computer logs, the samples you collected." I finally found my voice. It came out as a croak. "The game show. The smiling man. The figure nodded slowly. The simple gesture hit me harder than any punch. It was real. It was all real. We're calling it a parasitic fungal agent with advanced neurotropic and psychomimetic properties, he said, his voice flat and professional, as if he were discussing a weather report. It creates a shared cognitive network, a broadcast hallucination. We've seen it in the others. Parrish. Gable. The family in 2C. You were the only one who was fighting it, documenting it. You're the key, Mr. Collins. You're the baseline. They led me to the command tent. They cut off the filthy hospital gown and wrapped me in thick, warm blankets. Someone gave me a cup of coffee that scalded my hands. It was the best thing I'd ever felt. I told them everything. I didn't have to beg them to believe me. This time, they listened. They listened. And they nodded. And they cross-referenced my words with the data on their screens. They confirmed the reports from other tenants, incoherent ramblings that now, with my testimony as a cipher, made perfect horrible sense. The head researcher, a man who introduced himself as Dr. Ibrahim, finally sat across from me. He'd taken his mask off. He had tired, kind eyes, but they didn't offer any comfort. They just looked weary. You saved a lot of lives, Leo, he said, his voice quiet. The alarm you triggered at the hospital, your escape, it put you on our radar just as our own teams were getting the first incoherent reports. You accelerated the timeline. You let us get here before this thing sporulated, before it got airborne and hit the whole damn city. His words should have made me feel like a hero. I just felt empty. They took me to a mobile decontamination unit. It was a long, sterile trailer. They ran tests, drew blood, scanned my brain. I sat on the edge of an examination table, the paper crinkling beneath me. I felt clean, scoured. But the feeling didn't reach deeper than my skin. Ibrahim came back in an hour later. He was holding a tablet, his face grim. The air in the trailer suddenly felt very cold. Well, I asked. We've done a full systemic flush, he said, avoiding my eyes. He stared at the screen. The good news is we've managed to purge the active fungal spores from your system. We see no remaining biological agents. Physically, the fungus is gone. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my chest in a shudder. It's over. Ibrahim finally looked up from the tablet. His eyes met mine. The kindness was gone. Now there was only pity. No, he said. It's not. He held up the tablet. It showed a 3D model of a human brain, glowing with intricate pathways of light. My brain. The fungus wasn't just a poison, Leo. It was an architect. To broadcast its signal, its game show, it needed to build a receiver. It didn't just infect your brain, it upgraded it. It rewired you. It opened pathways, forged new synaptic connections that weren't there before. My heart, which had just started to slow, began to hammer against my ribs again. A cold dread, worse than anything I'd felt in the apartment, began to creep up my spine. What are you saying? Ibrahim swiped a finger across the screen. A section of the brain model flared a bright, angry red. The temporal lobe. The seat of memory and perception. We got rid of the fungus. But the changes it made to your brain chemistry, to your neural structure, they're irreversible. He took a deep breath. Think of your mind as a house with all the doors and windows locked. The fungus was a skeleton key. It picked the lock, came inside, and threw a party. We've kicked the fungus out. We've taken away the key. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But the door is still unlocked, wide open in fact. And we don't know how to lock it again. A wave of nausea rolled through me. What door? What does that mean? It means your brain is now permanently, profoundly susceptible to input. Apophenia. Auditory and visual misinterpretations. Hallucinations. The hardware built is still there. The receiver is still active. The monster is gone, Leo. But it left its radio behind, right in the middle of your head. And now, anything can pick up the microphone. He paused, and his next words were a death sentence. You're going to have to live with it. The world tilted. The sterile white walls of the trailer seemed to pulse, to breathe. The monster wasn't beaten, it wasn't contained, it had just changed tactics. It was no longer in the walls of my apartment, it was in the walls of my skull. 6 months later, the new apartment was white, the walls were white, the furniture was white, the sheets were white, no clutter, no dark corners, sunlight streamed through the large, clean windows. I had a job. A boring data entry job I could do from home. I had a routine, I measured my food, I meditated, I took the pills the government doctors gave me, pills that were supposed to strengthen the signal-to-noise ratio in my brain. I was rebuilding, that's what I told my therapist. I was creating a controlled environment, a fortress of bland, clean, predictable reality. The Northwood building had been demolished, wiped from the earth. The official story was a chemical spill from an old, forgotten industrial site beneath the foundation. A cover-up. Only a handful of us knew the truth. And the others were in long-term care facilities, their minds permanently tuned to the dead air of a phantom broadcast. I was the one who got out. The lucky one. Tonight I was brushing my teeth. Just a normal act on a normal Tuesday. I stared at my face in the bathroom mirror. I looked older. Tired. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. I leaned in to spit into the sink. When I looked back up, it happened. It lasted no longer than a heartbeat, a single, skipped frame in the movie of my life. My reflection, the man in the mirror with the toothpaste foam on his lips, smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was wider, sharper. It was a knowing, predatory grin. And then he winked at me. A slow, deliberate wink. My blood turned to ice. My heart stopped. I slammed my eyes shut, my knuckles white on the edge of the porcelain sink. It's not real. It's the door. The receiver. It's not real. I counted to 5, my breath held tight in my chest. Then I opened my eyes. My reflection was normal. Just me. Pale, terrified, my own confused, frightened eyes staring back at me. The smile was gone. It was just my own mouth, hanging slightly open. A trick of the light. A symptom. A glitch in the damaged hardware. That's all. But I knew. The apartment building was a pile of rubble. The fungus was ash. But the game wasn't over. It was just starting the bonus round. And the prize was my sanity.